Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a world where bedtime looks nothing like what you know, where your soft mattress and phone-scrolling routine are replaced by smoky rafters, prickly straw, and the unsettling awareness that you probably won't survive this if you're expecting anything remotely comfortable. You're stepping into the nightly rhythm of medieval peasants, the people who perfected the art of making do with a lifestyle that would send any modern sleep consultant into early retirement. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, drop your location and the local time in the comments, because I love seeing where in the world you're watching from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into the dim interior of a medieval peasant cottage, and immediately the air hits you. Warm from the daytime cooking fire, but edged with that chilly undercurrent that always creeps in after sunset. The place feels small even before you fully step inside, and you can practically hear your modern brain whispering, "There is no way 8 people fit in here at night." But they did, often more. Your eyes adjust slowly, catching the rough outlines of low beams, crooked furniture, and a bed that looks less like a resting place, and more like a suggestion. It's all part of a routine that millions of medieval peasants lived every single night, whether they liked it or not. You're here to understand why they slept the way they did. This odd 2-part nighttime schedule historians call segmented sleep. Mainstream history tells us that people typically had a first sleep right after dusk, and a second sleep that started after a mysterious midnight wake period. You'd think they invented the world's first accidental polyphasic sleep trend, but no. This was just daily life. And quirky historical notes suggest that the first sleep was so common, many languages actually had distinct words for it. Meanwhile, historians still argue whether this pattern was universal across all classes, or mainly shaped by peasant workloads and minimal lighting. But tonight, you'll learn firsthand how much the environment dictated everything. You brush your hand across the coarse wooden wall. There's no insulation, no plaster, nothing stopping the wind except hope and some mud stuffing between the planks. And somehow, this entire structure feels more alive than the typical modern bedroom. You can practically hear the place breathing. The creak of timber as it cools, the crackle of the last glowing ember, the faint scurry of something you're absolutely pretending is just a mouse. Joke 1, don't worry, 2 more incoming. The first major reality check hits you. Peasants didn't sleep in one long stretch because the world simply didn't allow it. When you have no electric lights, your internal rhythm becomes tied to the sun whether you like it or not. Lamps and candles were expensive, so people worked from dawn until dusk, exhausted themselves, and then collapsed whenever darkness settled in. But because the night was long, especially in winter, waking up naturally after a few hours wasn't weird. It was expected. What we consider insomnia today would have been just Tuesday. You wander deeper inside, noticing how the bed, if you can even call this wooden frame an itchy straw bag a bed, is positioned close to the hearth. That's the warmest spot in the house, and warmth is a luxury. A mainstream fact, medieval cottages leaked heat like a colander leaks water. Temperatures inside could drop dangerously low, especially in Northern Europe. So the entire family piled near the fire not for bonding but for survival. Even so, quirky records show that some households preferred sleeping benches because beds attracted too many fleas. Yes, benches. Suddenly your cheap IKEA mattress sounds like royal luxury. You step back as the fire pops, sending tiny sparks upward. You smell a faint mix of smoke, old straw and damp wool, an accidental ASMR aroma blend. Somewhere outside, a dog barks, and inside, the cottage settles again. You can almost imagine how you'd feel slipping into your first sleep at this moment. Not drifting off gracefully, but collapsing from sheer exhaustion after hours of manual labour that would leave your smartwatch screaming in protest. As you keep exploring, you realise how much this nightly pattern shaped medieval life. People prayed before bed, telling stories and passing down knowledge in that liminal time right before first sleep. Some scholars think this pattern might have encouraged deeper dream interpretation. After all, dreams felt more vivid when waking halfway through the night was normal. And yes, there are quirky tidbits of medieval manuals advising what to do during that midnight wake window, from reciting psalms to, let's just say, married couples made use of the quiet. Historians still argue whether that practice was encouraged or simply tolerated, but the debate lives on in dusty academic corners. You shift around, feeling the uneven floorboards beneath your feet. You joke to yourself that this entire cottage is one big fire hazard. Joke too. But this was reality for ordinary peasants. Their lives were shaped by rhythms you're only beginning to experience. Light and darkness, heat and cold, exhaustion and short-lived comfort. And the idea that people slept all night in some serene monastic silence. Absolute myth. They woke, worked, whispered, worried, and waited for dawn. Yet here you are, preparing to lie down on this scratchy straw mattress while the world outside falls into a deeper hush. You're standing right at the edge of understanding their strange, segmented sleep routine, not as a historical curiosity, but as something you're about to experience step by step. Joke 3 incoming. You glance at the bed again, trying to imagine fitting your entire extended family on it. Suddenly Thanksgiving doesn't seem so crowded. The night is beginning, the hearth is fading, and the rhythm of medieval rest is pulling you into its strange gravity. Soon you'll settle into that first sleep, just like everyone else did. You edge deeper into the cottage, and the first thing you notice is how the cold doesn't just sit in the room, it moves. It creeps along the floorboards, curls around your ankles, and rises slowly like a shy but persistent ghost. You shuffle your feet and realize that the only reliable warmth here comes from bodies, fire, and sheer stubbornness. You're inside a medieval peasant home now, and the cold, crowded reality of night is settling over you like a damp wool blanket that's never quite dry. You take a slow breath and look around. The space feels impossibly cramped, and you're not even trying to lie down yet. The cottage is made of wattle and daub, sticks woven like a giant wicker basket and covered with mud. The walls aren't straight. They bulge in places like they're tired of holding themselves up. The roof beams sag gently, and you can see daylight through the gaps if you look up, meaning you'll definitely see moonlight too. Luxury skylight, you whisper sarcastically, awarding yourself joke number 1 of the section. There might be one actual bed, maybe 2 if this family is weirdly well off. Beds are precious pieces of furniture, and peasants treat them like their version of a modern SUV, expensive, multi-purpose, barely attainable, and kind of a status symbol. But don't get the wrong idea. These beds aren't fluffy havens. They're wooden frames with a sack of straw called a palliasse. On top of that sits another layer of slightly better straw, because why suffer once when you can suffer twice? The mattress has lumps, smells faintly of last season's harvest, and you're starting to suspect it has its own personal ecosystem living inside it. Mainstream history tells us these cottages usually held an entire family. Parents, several children, sometimes a grandparent or 2, and on rare occasions a servant or unrelated labourer. And here's the kicker. Animals sometimes slept inside too. Chickens, goats, maybe a piglet. Anything valuable that might be stolen or eaten by a wolf stayed under the same roof. The warmth they produced was welcome, even if the aroma was not. Historians still argue whether animals truly slept in the same room or in a partitioned area, but enough written accounts confirm that peasants weren't picky when temperatures dropped. As you walk to the far end of the cottage, the air gets even heavier. There's only one tiny window, an opening covered with oiled cloth instead of glass. It lets in the faintest smear of moonlight, just enough to navigate without braining yourself on a stool. Medieval peasants didn't waste fully fledged wooden shutters unless they were wealthier than average. So if wind blew, the cloth flapped. If rain hit, it leaked. And if someone outside sneezed, well, congratulations. You probably heard and smelled it. You run your hand along a crooked table surface that doubles as a workbench, dining table, and please don't touch my important stuff shelf. Every object here serves at least 2 purposes: a bench as a seat, a storage space, and occasionally a sleeping platform. A chest is a container for clothes, a stool, and sometimes the equivalent of a cradle. This cottage doesn't do extra. Everything is survival-focused, multifunctional, and deeply used. You turn and nearly bump into a large spinning wheel standing in the dimness. Of course it's here. Many peasants spun wool at home during the evening. You realize quickly that nighttime wasn't for relaxing. It was for finishing tasks you couldn't do during the day. So even though everyone is exhausted, the cottage stays busy, noisy, and cluttered late into the evening. Sleep is something people fit in around their responsibilities, not something they schedule with a cozy nighttime routine. And then you look over to the hearth again. a wide open stone fireplace with a pot hanging from a crooked iron hook. Smoke curls in lazy spirals upward, some drifting out through a hole in the roof, some choosing to linger in the rafters. You're coughing within seconds because medieval smoke ventilation is optimistic. Quirky fact, many homes had no chimney at all. Smoke just filled the room until it drifted out the thatch roof. Not ideal for the lungs, but excellent for keeping insects out of the rafters. If you ever wondered why medieval peasants always look a little red-eyed in the illustrations, well, here's your answer. You take a place near the hearth and feel the faint warmth on your face. Behind you, cold presses in like a physical thing. This contrast shapes everything about how peasants sleep. They cluster near heat, pack together tightly, and avoid the icy far corners of the cottage like they contain dragons. And honestly, if a dragon did live there, at least it'd be warm. Joke number 2. The crowded nature of this living space does something strange to your sense of time. Modern houses separate night from day neatly. Bedrooms for sleeping, living rooms for waking. Medieval cottages don't bother. The same room hosts meals, chores, arguments, births, deaths, and everything in between. Sleep is just another activity that unfolds in the same cramped space. If someone rolls over, everyone knows. If a child cries, everyone hears. And if someone snores, well, calling the parish priest won't save you. A mainstream fact to anchor you. Medieval peasants typically lived in single-room homes until the later Middle Ages. Even then, many families didn't expand unless they had money or land. So for most people across Europe, this one-room cottage was their entire world. And as you stand here, you feel the reality of how close-knit, literally and metaphorically, these communities were. There's a quirky tidbit too. In some regions, people hung their limited clothing from rafters above the bed so that spirits or night creatures wouldn't mistake them for empty bodies to possess. Whether they believed it fully or treated it like knocking on wood, the practice existed. Historians still argue whether this custom spread through superstition or through practical habit. Clothes dry better up high, but the debate remains open. You shuffle again, accidentally kicking a stool, and nearly wake the imaginary sleeping family around you. And this reminds you of the final, most bizarre reality. Privacy didn't exist. Not in the modern sense. Sharing space wasn't just normal, it was unavoidable. If someone rolled over, someone else felt it. If someone mumbled in their sleep, half the room heard. And if someone took the blanket, well, that's just medieval warfare without weapons. Somehow, though, people adapted. This cold, crowded cottage is their safe place, their survival zone, their nightly refuge. And tonight, it becomes yours too. Joke number 3. You look around at the 8 imaginary roommates you suddenly inherited and think, well, at least rent is cheap. The night deepens, the fire softens to a glowing red, and you prepare to settle into this tightly packed space. The medieval night is wrapping itself around you, urging you closer to the hearth and closer to understanding how peasants slept through the ages. You ease yourself down toward the hearth, letting the last strands of warmth lick gently at your hands. The fire is no longer a roaring blaze, more like a stubborn old man who refuses to go to bed before telling one more story. Its embers glow in a rich orange, and every so often one crackles in protest, sending a tiny spark spiraling upward. You settle beside it, realizing instantly why medieval peasants clung to this fading glow like a lifeline. Total darkness wasn't just inconvenient, it was unsettling, dangerous, and honestly a little boring. But firelight turned the cottage into a soft, flickering cocoon. You stretch out near the palliasse, feeling the prickle of straw through the thin linen sheet. It's scratchy, uneven, and makes you think, very clearly, about your modern memory foam mattress. That thought counts as tonight's first joke. The way you're gripping this straw sack like it's going to provide lumbar support should qualify as medieval optimism. As you settle, you notice something. Even though it's late, the cottage isn't fully dark, and that's not just because of the fire. Medieval peasants rarely slept in pitch blackness. A mainstream historical fact explains why. True darkness was expensive. Candles took bees, time, wax, and skill. Oil lamps needed precious fuel. So peasants used the cheapest, safest, most reliable light source they had. The hearth's slow-burning glow. Even when the flames died down, they banked the fire, burying it under ashes so it smouldered all night. This kept the room dimly visible and ready to be reignited at dawn. You lie on your side and squint across the room. Shadows stretch long and soft, melting into corners where they seem to gather and breathe. You imagine how every silhouette, hanging tools, crooked beams, even a simple wooden ladle, might look like something else to a tired mind. There's something about firelight that turns objects into stories, shapes into creatures, and silence into suspense. A quirky tidbit floats into your thoughts. Some medieval households believed certain shadows were caused by mischievous spirits called wights that wandered through homes at night. People didn't necessarily fear them, but they certainly respected them. In some regions, peasants muttered quick blessings when shadows moved strangely, half joking and half serious. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were genuinely widespread or more localized to rural pockets, but either way, the idea adds an extra layer of flavor to this dim interior. You roll slightly and feel the warm patch of earthen floor beneath your palm, still absorbing the heat of the fire. The soundscape of the room softens into something rhythmic. The crackle of charcoal, the distant hoot of an owl outside, and the faint exhale of someone in a nearby bed. The soft hum of night seems almost intentional, as if medieval houses had their own built-in ASMR tracks. Another joke presents itself naturally. You briefly consider that the owl hoot might be a medieval notification sound. You have one new nocturnal visitor. Perfect, that's joke number 2. You glance at the small lamp sitting on a nearby shelf. It's barely a lamp, more like a ceramic bowl with a wick. It's not in use tonight, but you can see remnants of soot clinging stubbornly to its rim. These lamps were precious, lit only when absolutely necessary. A bit of oil wasted at night could mean a darker, more dangerous trip to the barn at dawn, or a late-night task done in total blindness. And so, the hearth becomes the star of the night. It's your nightlight, your heater, your security system, your coffee maker, your cooking stove, your everything. You begin to understand why peasants centered their entire sleeping arrangement around it. Without the fire, nights would be frigid, pitch black, and filled with every uncomfortable sound imaginable. With it, even the shadows seem friendly. You watch the last flame flicker like a tired candle. Its glow is comforting, but also a reminder of how fragile warmth is in a house like this. If it dies completely, the room will quickly drop several degrees, cold enough that you might honestly consider sleeping with a farm animal for survival. Another joke emerges from that thought. Making number 3. You wonder if pigs were the medieval version of heated blankets. Probably not as cozy, but definitely warmer. Your eyes wander along the walls, noticing how soot collects in black streaks. Medieval houses didn't just smell smoky, they were smoky. A mainstream fact worth noting. Long-term exposure to these conditions caused chronic respiratory issues, especially among women who spent more time cooking. Some archaeologists even found soot embedded in the ribs of skeletons, proof that these smoky nights left permanent marks. But firelight wasn't all hardship. It shaped the entire emotional tone of medieval evenings. Families told stories here, whispered prayers, and planned the next day's work. They listened to the pop of the wood and the quiet breathing of children drifting into their first sleep. They watched the long shadows shift, blending comfort with the faint hint of danger. And in some ways, the fire connected them to each other, to the land, to their ancestors who had slept like this for centuries. You take another deep breath. The scent of the hearth, earthy, warm, a little sharp, anchors you to this place. You understand why peasants didn't fear the dark as much as you might. The fire gave them just enough light to feel grounded, enough visibility to find water, check on children, or swat an overly curious mouse. Speaking of which, a tiny scuffle near the woodpile catches your ear. Probably a mouse, or a rat, or in your mind a medieval night gremlin. But since this is a gentle, sleepy narrative, you decide it's just a mouse wearing tiny medieval boots. Much less alarming. The fire dims further. The room cools. Everyone around you sinks deeper into their straw beds. You feel the onset of something familiar. A heaviness in your eyelids. A slow drift towards sleep. Maybe it's the warmth. Maybe it's the darkness. Maybe it's because you've been mentally wrestling with scratchy straw for 10 minutes. The firelight finally fades to a warm red glow, and you realize you're naturally slipping toward the fabled first sleep. It comes quietly, not with a cinematic fade, but with a soft heaviness that wraps you like a coarse wool cloak. This is the moment medieval peasants waited for, the gentle slide from wakefulness into the first stage of segmented sleep. And you're right on schedule. You sink deeper into the straw mattress, letting the warmth from the hearth seep into your bones. The cottage hums with a kind of sleepy stillness, the sort that wraps itself around you, whether you're ready or not. Your eyes grow heavy, and before you realize it, you're being tugged gently toward what medieval peasants called their first sleep. It doesn't arrive politely. It sneaks in, settles across your shoulders and whispers, "Time's up. You're done for the day." You lie still, listening to the natural slowing of the household around you. Someone shifts nearby, the straw rustling like dry leaves. A baby exhales with a soft wheeze. A dog, probably curled under the table, lets out a sleepy grunt. The world outside has already sunk into thick darkness, but inside the ember glow keeps the shadows at bay. This dimness is just enough to let your mind drift without panicking about what lurks in the corners. A mainstream historical fact floats into your thoughts. Medieval peasants usually collapsed into their first sleep not long after sunset, especially in winter. And honestly, that tracks. Without electric lights, entertainment, or a 1 a.m. doom-scrolling session, people simply gave up on consciousness earlier. They worked from dawn until sunset doing heavy labour, ploughing, harvesting, repairing tools, tending animals. So by nightfall, they weren't seeking me time, they were seeking coma time. You curl your toes, feeling the cold tags at the edge of the bed. The closer you pull toward the fire, the warmer it becomes. The farther you drift, the more the night nips at you. It's a constant negotiation between comfort and survival. And that's when you realise why first sleep wasn't optional. It was the body's insistence. The rhythm hits you. Your breathing slows. The heaviness in your limbs becomes delicious. You're lying in the same spot hundreds of millions of peasants once collapsed into. And suddenly their world doesn't feel abstract. It feels familiar, simple, heavy, inevitable. A quirky tidbit to keep your mind wandering. Some medieval writers believed the best dreams happened during the first sleep because that's when the vapours of digestion rose to the brain most efficiently. Now, you're not fully convinced your dinner vapours are unlocking spiritual visions, but you appreciate the logic. It's surprisingly thoughtful. Historians still argue whether these ideas came from medical theory or from folk tradition, but either way, it adds an amusing dimension to drifting off beside a smoky hearth. Your eyelids droop again. The warmth is hypnotic. But then you become aware of the sounds, not the obvious ones like breathing or crackling embers, but the tiny persistent murmurs that fill medieval nights. Wood settles, thatched roofs sigh. Mice decide this is the perfect time for interpretive dance. Those little noises were normal, and peasants didn't panic over them like a modern Airbnb reviewer would. No one complained about ambient rustic soundscapes. They just sleep-waltz through it. Joke number 1 lands naturally as you picture leaving a medieval Yelp review. Cottage was cosy, but the straw mattress attempted to exfoliate my entire body. 2 stars. You shift again, letting your cheek rest against the linen. It smells a bit like smoke, a bit like the outdoors, and a bit like we definitely don't have detergent. Medieval peasants washed their bedding far less frequently than we do today, mostly because it required hours of backbreaking laundry work. Linen sheets were cleaned occasionally, but mattresses stuffed with straw, those got refreshed maybe once or twice a year. You silently promise yourself never to complain about laundry day again. As your body grows heavier, the flickering fire paints slow-moving patterns on the wall. They look almost alive, dancing to their own sleepy rhythm. You imagine long ago villagers watching the same shapes, letting them lull their senses, using them as the night's final entertainment before sinking into unconsciousness. There's something oddly comforting about that, shared humanity across centuries. One of the oddest things, though, is how naturally your brain starts slipping into sleep despite the scratchiness, cold spots, and mysterious mouse choreography. That's because you're experiencing what scholars call circadian entrainment, your internal clock syncing to natural light. Without digital clocks or screens, peasants followed the sun's cues perfectly. Another mainstream fact: the first sleep usually lasted a few hours, maybe 4 or so. People didn't measure time precisely, but they knew the pattern. They fell asleep early. They woke around midnight. They stayed awake for a bit. Then they slid back into their second sleep. The two-sleep system wasn't a quirky rarity. It was the norm across Europe for centuries, and as you drift, your thoughts slow. The sensations soften. Your mind becomes a hazy watercolor painting instead of a sharp photograph. The fire's warmth, the cool air nibbling at your toes, the gentle hum of breathing around you, they blend into a lullaby you didn't expect to enjoy. Joke number 2 sneaks in as you realize you're experiencing the medieval version of melatonin, sheer exhaustion. You slip in and out of a dreamy haze. A child coughs briefly. Someone rolls over. A distant rooster, confused and overenthusiastic, lets out a premature crowing. You tell yourself that even medieval villagers probably muttered, "Not now, Kevin," at their roosters. Joke number 3 accomplished. The sense of heaviness deepens, and you're drifting toward that satisfying moment when the boundary between awake and asleep blurs. Your breathing evens, your heart slows. Your mind begins weaving quiet, wandering images that make no sense yet somehow feel soothing. You're sliding into first sleep now, the honest, heavy sleep of someone who has done enough for one day. The fire glows softly behind you. The cottage dissolves into a dark lull, and the medieval world holds you gently, accepting you into a rhythm older than memory. You've entered the first sleep. But unlike modern nights, this is only the beginning. You surface from your first sleep the way a swimmer breaks through calm water, slowly, quietly, with that faint sense of, "Where am I again?" lingering in your mind. The cottage is different now, not louder, not brighter, just awake in its own subtle way. The embers in the hearth have cooled into a deep, breathing red. The air feels cooler, like someone gently opened the door to winter while you weren't looking. You blink a few times trying to orient yourself, and then it hits you. It's the middle of the night, and this is exactly when medieval peasants expected to wake. This midnight interval had a name, the watch, or in some regions simply the waking. And what's wild is that this wasn't considered insomnia or restlessness. It was normal, healthy, and part of the nightly rhythm. Mainstream historical sources describe people rising naturally after their first sleep, staying awake for an hour or two, then slipping into their second sleep without stress. Today, if you woke at midnight for 2 hours, Google would tell you you're dying. But here, you're right on schedule. You lift your head slowly from the straw pillow listening. The cottage is full of those soft in-between sounds. Someone's gentle snore turning into a murmur, a baby shifting in its sleep, the faint drip of water near the door, the wood stretching in the cold. Outside, the wind hums against the walls. Inside, you hear a subtle rustling, the unmistakable sound of someone else waking up too. This is when medieval life gets surprisingly busy. You sit up on the bed, rubbing your arms against the chill. The fire's glow casts a warm puddle of light on the floor. Shadows stretch long and strange, like the cottage is bigger at night than it is during the day. Your breath puffs faintly in front of you, and as you shuffle closer to the warmth, your feet step on a cold patch of floor that jolts you awake. Joke number 1 practically writes itself. Congratulations, you've discovered the medieval version of a bad alarm clock. A mainstream fact. Many people used this midnight interval for prayer. Manuals from the 15th century even recommended specific psalms for waking hours, as though God had a preferred time slot between 12 and 2 a.m. You glance at the imaginary family around you. A few are already stirring, sitting up, murmuring softly. One person rolls out of bed completely and begins tending to the fire, adding a piece of wood, poking the embers, coaxing life back into the room. You inch closer, letting the warmth kiss your cheeks. This fire tending wasn't just about comfort, it was about survival. Banked embers could go cold if not maintained, and if they died, well, restarting the fire in the morning was difficult, time-consuming, and a little humiliating. Nobody wanted to be the one who let the fire die last night, so tending it during the watch was as routine as brushing your teeth, minus the minty freshness. Another person gets up to check on the animals. Yes, even at this hour. If a cow was giving birth, or a goat was restless, or something suspicious prowled near the barn, this was the time to catch it. Quirky tidbit. Some medieval farmers believed that the quiet midnight air was when animals were most vulnerable to mischievous spirits, or roaming witches. Whether you believe in supernatural goat harassment or not, people did use the watch to ensure the barn wasn't being raided by thieves or foxes. Historians still argue whether those beliefs came from genuine fear or just passed down superstition. But either way, you're glad you don't have to sprint outside in the cold to check on a medieval chicken. You stretch your legs, shaking off the remnants of your dream, something about climbing an impossibly tall haystack, while a rooster judged your performance. Yup, midnight brain is wild. Someone nearby lights a tiny lamp with a glowing ember. The faint yellow flicker gently illuminates the cottage. This isn't a party, it's a routine. Couples talk quietly, parents nurse fussy infants back to calm. Older children shift around or play quietly. A few adults use this time to mend clothes or sharpen tools. Yes, actual work. Imagine waking up at midnight and thinking, time to fix the sock. Joke number 2. This watch was a surprisingly productive period. Early scientists, even centuries later, wrote about how the mind was most free and contemplative after the first sleep. Peasants probably didn't describe it that poetically, but they used the time efficiently. Some prayed, some reflected on dreams, some chatted softly with their spouses, some took advantage of the privacy and, well, shared marital moments. In fact, several historical medical texts recommended conception during the watch because the body was well rested and balanced. You file that away under things you did not expect medieval doctors to care about. You lean back against the bed frame, feeling the cold wood press through your shirt. The night feels different now, like it has its own landscape. This is the hour when the world is awake but muted, alive but gentle. It's peaceful, but with just a hint of suspense. You imagine how many generations lived these tiny nocturnal hours, whispering, working, thinking, waiting. You start to understand how deeply woven this pattern was into their lives. The cottage is still, but not silent. A dog scratches, someone coughs. A faraway church bell tolls once, marking the passing of time with medieval precision, somewhere between exact science and educated guess. A mainstream fact: church bells regulated everything. They called people to prayer, marked work hours, announced danger, and even signalled when it was time to wake for the second sleep. But nobody here needs a bell. Their bodies already know what to do. You feel yourself fully awake now, oddly refreshed, like your body has accepted this strange schedule. That's the magic of this moment. The watch feels natural once you're in it. You glance outside through the oiled cloth window. The moonlight paints silver shapes across the yard. The world looks frozen, paused. It's as if the night is holding its breath until dawn. But the watch doesn't last forever. People begin to settle again. A child finishes nursing and drifts back to sleep. Someone yawns widely and climbs back onto the straw mattress. The fire glows softer, quieter. You feel the pull too, a gentle tug at the edges of your consciousness, inviting you to return to the warm darkness. Joke number 3 settles in as you think. We really traded segmented sleep for late-night TikTok. Humanity may have peaked too early. Your limbs relax. The cold feels less sharp. The embers cast a soft halo across the cottage. This midnight window, this strange quiet pause, has run its course. It's time to drift into the second sleep. You ease yourself back onto the straw mattress, letting the warmth of the banked embers pull you in again. But second sleep doesn't rush you. It waits, lingering around the edges of your mind, giving you a moment to hover in that dreamy space where thoughts stretch like warm taffy. Your breathing slows, your body softens, and you settle into the darkness. Only now, the night feels different, deeper, stranger. This is the hour when medieval dreams and fears come creeping. Your eyelids fall halfway, but your imagination is fully awake. That's because second sleep wasn't just another nap. It was where medieval people believed their minds drifted closest to the spiritual or supernatural world. And honestly, lying here with the firelight reduced to a faint reddish blush, you understand why. The cottage is quiet in a way that feels almost intentional, as if the shadows themselves have stories to tell. A mainstream historical fact anchors you. Dream interpretation was a common pastime in medieval Europe. Everything, from falling to flying to seeing animals, meant something. Peasants didn't necessarily own dream manuals like the wealthy did, but the oral traditions were strong. If you dreamed of muddy water, Someone would insist it foretold a scandal. If you dreamed of bread, it probably meant hunger, because, let's be honest, your stomach had opinions too. But the quirky tidbit you remember now is even more fun. In some regions, people believed dreams during the second sleep were more truthful, because the soul had already roamed during the first sleep and returned wiser. The logic is fuzzy, but charming. Historians still argue whether this belief was widespread, or an oddity limited to only a few communities, but it survives in scattered folk, stories giving the second sleep a mystical reputation. You snuggle deeper into the straw, feeling it poke at your hip like a judgmental cat. Joke number 1 arrives naturally. Yes, the medieval pillow is uncomfortable, but hey, it's still softer than your high school gym floor, so that's something. Your mind drifts, dancing somewhere between half dream and half memory. You're suddenly aware of how many dangers lurked in medieval nights. Not just supernatural ones, though people certainly worried about ghosts, demons, and wandering spirits, but very real hazards. Houses burned easily. Thieves lurked in the dark. Animals escaped. Predators prowled. A spark from the hearth or a door left unlatched could ruin a family overnight. You shift slightly, imagining how peasants took this seriously. Many left offerings or charms near their beds, tiny objects meant to ward off bad dreams or keep evil away. A sprig of rosemary, a carved symbol, a piece of iron, anything that whispered, "Please don't let the spooky stuff mess with me while I'm unconscious." Someone nearby whimpers in their sleep, snapping you back to the cottage. Maybe they're dreaming, maybe they're cold, maybe they're living through their own medieval nightmare of discovering they forgot to feed the chickens. Either way, you soften your breathing, not wanting to add another noise to the room. The darkness is thick, but not hostile, just sleepy. You lie there, thinking about how dreams shaped medieval beliefs. If someone dreamed of a recently deceased relative, that wasn't scary. It was a sign, a message, maybe a blessing, maybe a warning. Some even believed dreams were a realm where angels and demons battled for influence over the human heart. You, meanwhile, just wish your dreams involved fewer unexpected math tests. Joke number 2 appears as you think. If medieval peasants had nightmares like mine, they'd probably blame it on a cursed turnip or something. A chill slides across your shoulders, and you tug the wool blanket up to your chin. The fire is barely glowing now, a soft red pulse that almost looks alive. The shadows shift in slow waves across the wall. You blink at them, reminding yourself that this is just the fire breathing out its last bit of warmth, not a mischievous night creature dancing in the corner. But the medieval mind saw these shapes differently. Night contained beauty and danger in equal measure. People genuinely feared wandering alone in the dark because everything, from thieves to wolves to spirits, felt more powerful. You understand that now, lying here with the quiet pressing into your ears. A dog somewhere in the room lets out a tiny growl, the soft, curious kind that means something moved. You freeze, not in fear but in awareness. Night sharpens the senses. Medieval peasants lived in that heightened state constantly. No wonder their dreams felt so vivid. A mainstream fact floats through your thoughts again. Segmented sleep often. Intensified dream recall. People woke during the watch, discussed their dreams, then returned to sleep and continued them. Imagine being able to pause and resume your dreams like a medieval Netflix. It must have been wild. Your own thoughts begin to blur again. This is how second sleep begins, softly, silently, pulling you down like a warm tide. Your limbs loosen, your breath deepens, the cold fades, and suddenly the cottage doesn't feel eerie anymore. It feels safe, quiet, and strangely warm. Joke number 3 gently taps you. If a medieval demon wants to visit tonight, it better bring a blanket. It's freezing. Your mind drifts again, this time slower, more deliberate. The darkness stops being something to interpret and becomes something to float in. The room fades, the sounds fade, even the awareness of your own body softens. You're not quite dreaming yet. But you're close. The borderlands between waking and sleeping stretch long and smooth, like a quiet country road. The fire gives one last sigh, a soft pop. Someone shifts nearby. A rooster, not Kevin this time, mumbles a confused pre-dawn grumble. You slide into the second sleep of the night. Deep, heavy, dream-filled and strangely peaceful. For medieval peasants, this was the sweetest sleep of all. You wake slowly, not with a jolt, but with that soft drifting awareness that comes when the world is just starting to rebuild itself around you. The cottage is still dark, still cold, still wrapped in the deep quiet of early morning, but something feels different. The second sleep has done its work, and now the sounds around you sharpen into focus. You hear breathing, movement, a faint sniffle, the gentle thud of someone shifting their weight on a wooden bench. And then it hits you. You're not alone. At all. You've never been alone here. And if there's one thing medieval peasants absolutely did not have at night, it's privacy. You sit up slowly, rubbing your eyes, and look around. The cottage is already beginning to stir. Beds are crowded, one mattress stuffed with straw containing 3 people, sometimes 4. A bench in the corner has someone curled on it like a medieval cat. A child is sprawled sideways over 2 adults with absolutely no remorse. And just to complete the picture, someone is using a bundle of cloth near the hearth as a pillow, snoring with heroic enthusiasm. You take it all in, and joke number 1 drifts in like a sleepy friend. Congratulations. You've unlocked the medieval DLC, Zero Personal Space Edition. A mainstream historical fact anchors the moment. Privacy, as we understand it today, simply didn't exist for most medieval peasants. Homes were single rooms, families were large, beds were few. People lived, ate, worked, argued, and slept in the same shared space. Walls were thin or non-existent. You could whisper, but everyone would hear it anyway. You could turn over, but someone would feel the shift. If someone had a nightmare, the whole room knew about it. That lack of privacy shaped everything about their sleep. You weren't just aware of your own rhythms, you were layered on top of everyone else's. Every snore, every cough, every whimper, every shift became part of the night's soundtrack. And weirdly enough, people just adapted. This was normal, expected, accepted. The cottage fills slowly with those familiar sounds. Someone yawns loudly. A baby fusses. A man clears his throat with the most medieval gargle you've ever heard. Someone's bare feet slap against the cold floor as they shuffle toward the hearth. You pull your blanket tighter around your shoulders, feeling the chill settle in the air with the weight of dawn. You glance around again and notice the noises aren't just inside. They're outside too. The soft snort of a horse, the bleat of a goat, the ever-present sound of chickens muttering about absolutely nothing. Thin walls mean you hear everything. Weather, animals, neighbours, late-night arguments, early morning chores. Privacy is an illusion. Sound passes through these walls as easily as gossip through a medieval tavern. Another quirky tidbit comes to mind. In some regions, people believed that loud nighttime noises, especially sudden knocks, groans, or creaks, were messages from spirits or omens. Even normal house sounds took on mystical meanings. Historians still argue whether peasants truly believed these signs, or simply used the stories to explain the bizarre noises their houses naturally made. But lying here in the dim half-light, you understand how easy it would be to imagine a ghost when a roof beam snaps loudly in the cold. You shift your position again, careful not to kick the imaginary person sleeping uncomfortably close to your ankle. The mattress sighs beneath you, a soft whoosh of straw settling. You watch a woman nearby bundle up her hair, then gently nudge a child whose head has made its home on her shoulder. The child groans in protest. She gives him a sleepy pat. The intimacy of this space is undeniable. When you sleep together every night, you learn each other's rhythms, fears, habits. Who snores, who talks in their sleep, who kicks, who steals blankets, who wakes early, who wakes late. It creates a strange blend of comfort and mild annoyance, like sharing a tent with your entire extended family for your whole life. Joke number 2 arrives as you picture yourself writing a medieval roommate complaint. Dear sir, I humbly request that Thomas stop breathing so loudly while I slumber. Sincerely, everyone. But it's not just funny, it's deeply humanizing. Such closeness shaped relationships. You couldn't hide moods or tension. You couldn't pretend everything was fine when you were 3 inches away from someone all night. Families were forced to understand each other at a level modern households rarely experience. Even neighbours lived close enough that nighttime sounds drifted between houses, making the entire village feel like one sprawling, snoring organism. As dawn inches closer, the cottage grows busier. Someone stokes the fire. Someone else begins sorting tools for morning tasks. A girl untangles her long braid and ties it into a loose knot. A man puts on his rough wool tunic, still half asleep. And you, watching all this unfold, feel the reality of communal living settle around you like an extra blanket. A mainstream fact: medieval nights were noisy, shockingly noisy. Between humans, animals, wind through the thatch, creaking wood, and occasional late-night visitors, human or otherwise, silence was rare. Total quiet was almost unnatural. It felt eerie, even dangerous. You rub your fingers over the blanket, feeling its coarse texture. It's warm but scratchy, functional but not luxurious. Everything in this cottage reflects that theme: practicality over comfort. And yet, despite the discomfort, this closeness is its own form of safety. Humans are pack animals by instinct, and here you feel protected not by walls, but by bodies, voices, and shared warmth. Another quirky detail surfaces. Some medieval households believed sleeping too far from others invited danger. Bad spirits, sickness, or even emotional despair. Isolation was seen as unnatural, something only hermits, outcasts, or very rich people experienced. Even scholars often slept communally in large halls. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were practical, for warmth and safety, or truly spiritual, but they are woven deep into folklore. The cottage lightens again as embers brighten. Dawn is close now. Joke number 3 slips in as you imagine yourself saying, "Good morning, I survived 8 strangers, 3 chickens, and 1 enthusiastic rooster." Not bad for a night's sleep. You stretch your arms, shake the cold from your legs, and realize the night has shaped you. You've lived through the sounds, the closeness, the lack of privacy. You've felt the shared human heartbeat of the cottage. And now, as morning creeps closer, the medieval day begins anew. You pull your blanket tighter as the room slowly brightens. But the first thing you feel isn't the fire's warmth. It's the quiet, persistent reality that you're practically stitched into a human lasagna. There's someone's elbow near your ribs. A child's foot is dangerously close to your face. A snoring adult is curled against the wall, their breath puffing in tiny clouds of morning chill. And then you remember. In the medieval world, sharing beds wasn't unusual, it was expected. You shift your weight, trying not to disturb the tangled pile of limbs around you. But let's be honest, movement is impossible without setting off a chain reaction. Someone grumbles, the straw mattress squeaks, a child rolls over and smacks an adult right in the cheek. Joke number 1 slips in effortlessly. Congratulations, you're experiencing the original shared room on a budget package. 5 stars for authenticity, 0 stars for personal space. A mainstream historical fact supports your current predicament. Medieval peasants rarely slept alone. Not because it was romantic or cozy, but because warmth was precious. Houses leaked heat like a broken bucket leaks water. Winters were brutal, and blankets, real, heavy, warm blankets, were expensive. So families piled together in one bed, or a few tightly packed sleeping spaces, sharing body heat and surviving the night as a team effort. You sit up a little, careful not to elbow anyone. The straw mattress beneath you shifts, releasing the faint smell of last year's harvest. The bed frame, handcrafted, slightly crooked, eternally squeaky, holds everyone like a wooden cradle built for too many people. Sleeping beside family members of all ages wasn't considered strange, shameful, or even particularly notable. It was practical, logical, essential. And then you remember the truly wild part. People also shared beds with strangers, travellers, neighbours, servants, apprentices, visiting relatives, even random guests during festivals or emergencies. If you needed a place to sleep, someone pointed to a bed and said, "Squeeze in." Imagine hosting a modern sleepover and telling your guests, "Sure, hop in next to Uncle Bartholomew and little Agnes." That's joke number 2. The logic wasn't just warmth, it was culture. A quirky tidbit you recall tells you that in some regions, refusing to share a bed was considered suspicious. People assumed you had something to hide, illness, arrogance, or secret sin. Sleeping alone meant isolation, and isolation meant danger or dishonor. Historians still argue whether this social suspicion was rooted in religious teachings or the harsh realities of communal living, But the result was the same. Solitude was rarely a choice. You shift again, now fully awake and hyper-aware of every tiny movement you make. The bed creaks loudly. The person beside you grunts and pulls the blanket closer. You instinctively do the same, learning the medieval art of blanket negotiation, equal parts patience, stealth, and passive-aggressive tugging. As you adjust your position, you take in the strange intimacy of this sleeping arrangement. You feel the warmth of shared breath. You smell the mix of wool, straw, smoke, and morning sweat. You hear the soft chorus of snores, each one different, like medieval wind instruments playing a family symphony. In modern life, you'd call this chaos. Here, it's normal. You glance across the room and notice the second bed, or rather, a wooden frame that passes for one. 2 adults sleep there, though it would barely fit one modern sleeper comfortably. Another child curls at their feet, half covered, half frozen, entirely unbothered. You wonder how anyone stays asleep with limbs everywhere, blankets being stolen, and someone inevitably breathing directly onto their neck. And then you realize the answer. Exhaustion. Hard labor wears the body down in ways modern life rarely replicates. After a day of digging fields, tending animals, or hauling water, peasants didn't so much lie down as fall into the mattress like felled trees. Even the discomfort of shared space couldn't compete with pure physical fatigue. As the others start to stir, you see someone sit up, stretch, and step carefully around the bed's crowded edges. They move with the practiced grace of someone who has navigated a maze of sleeping bodies every morning for decades. There's no tiptoeing, no hushed apologies. Everyone understands that mornings begin with some accidental elbowing and mattress wobbling. You climb out too, careful not to topple into the person still curled beside you like a sleepy dormouse. Your feet hit the cold wooden floor, and your body instantly regrets leaving the cluster of warmth. But you also feel a strange lightness, like breathing fresh air after being pressed between book pages. A mainstream fact returns to your mind. Bed sharing wasn't just about warmth. It was about social bonding. Families forged tight-knit relationships because they literally lived in constant physical proximity. Secrets were rare. Eavesdropping wasn't a choice. It was an inevitability. Children learned adult habits, rhythms, fears, and dreams simply by existing in the same sleeping space. Nightlife was a shared experience. Meanwhile, wealthier households with multiple rooms and private chambers looked at peasant sleeping arrangements with mild horror. But even among nobles, bed-sharing persisted. Servants often slept in their lord's chamber. Ladies-in-waiting slept in groups. Apprentices slept in guild halls. The idea of a private bedroom as we know it only became common centuries later. You stand fully now, stretching as your joints crack like old branches. A cold draft sneaks in through the wall, confirming once again why people preferred sleeping in a medieval cuddle pile. Someone nearby mumbles in their sleep, swatting the air like they're fighting off a dream bee. Joke number 3 lands naturally. If sleep position chaos were an Olympic sport, medieval families would absolutely dominate. The morning light grows stronger, the room stirs with movement, chatter, and the scent of yesterday's ashes warming into today's breakfast fire. You glance back at the bed, the rumpled sheets, the tangle of limbs, the warmth fading slowly from where you lay. You didn't just sleep in a medieval bed, you survived it. And now you understand how deeply bed-sharing shaped the rhythm of medieval nights. You stretch your legs, easing the stiffness from a night spent wedged between too many elbows and not enough blanket, and as you do, something pricks your ankle. Light, quick, annoyingly familiar. You freeze, then sigh. Yes, it's exactly what you think it is. In the medieval world, you didn't just sleep with family members, you slept with fleas, lice, mites, and whatever else considered your body a midnight buffet. A tiny itch blooms on your wrist, then another on your neck, and suddenly you're experiencing the nightly horror show that medieval peasants dealt with constantly. You scratch once, but that only seems to wake up the entire insect community. Joke number 1 arrives with perfect timing. Congratulations, your body is now the after-hours snack bar for medieval pests. A mainstream fact anchors your current suffering. Lice and fleas were everywhere in medieval Europe, especially among peasants. Not because they were dirty in the way modern people imagine, but because hygiene practices were limited, washing was infrequent, soaps were expensive, and, most importantly, parasites were simply part of the natural landscape. Fleas lived in straw mattresses, lice lived in hair, hats, clothing seams. Bedding wasn't laundered often, walls weren't sealed, animals slept in or near the cottage. In short, if you were warm-blooded, you were on the menu. You brush at your sleeve, watching something tiny jump away. The straw mattress rustles beneath you, releasing what you dearly hope is just dust. Medieval people accepted this reality the way you accept the existence of traffic. Annoying, but inescapable. They scratched, shrugged, and carried on. You pull the blanket aside and inspect the bed. The palliasse, stuffed with last year's straw, has clearly provided accommodations for more than just humans. And no, there's no mystery about what caused those little dark specks you see. Bedding attracted pests because beds offered the trifecta of survival: warmth, skin flakes, and moisture. Even changing the straw rarely solved the problem. It simply reset the infestation cycle, but don't think peasants just gave up. They fought back with determination and some truly creative tactics. A quirky tidbit rises to the surface. Medieval folklore recommended placing dried lavender, wormwood, or mint in bedding to repel fleas. Sounds nice, right? Except plenty of households use stronger, or stranger, methods. Some people sprinkled ashes in their bedding. Others dangled sachets of herbs above the bed. One popular trick involved hanging clothes above smoke so the fumes would kill parasites, and probably a few brain cells. Historians still argue whether these methods were genuinely effective or more symbolic rituals meant to feel protective, but either way, the war against parasites was constant. You rub your arm again, feeling another tiny itch bloom. The child beside you wakes up, scratching vigorously at their scalp as if playing a medieval percussion instrument. An adult nearby digs at their forearm with practiced resignation. Everyone scratches, everyone moves, everyone deals with the nighttime crawlies like it's just part of the weather. Because it was. You step carefully off the bed, hoping nothing living is hitching a ride on your clothing. The cold floorboards feel shockingly clean in comparison. You take a seat near the hearth, trying to pretend you're not still being crawled on. The ember glow gives the illusion of cleanliness, even though you absolutely know better. Another mainstream fact helps explain why lice were nearly universal. People didn't regularly wash their hair with soap. Instead, they used water alone, or in some cases combinations of vinegar, herbs, or even urine. Yes, you read that correctly, to cleanse or soften hair. Nitcombing was a chore, not a choice. Parents picked lice from their children's heads by the fire, cracking the insects between their fingernails with casual efficiency. You shudder slightly. Not because it's gross, but because it's so normal here. The cottage life leaves little room for squeamishness. You glance at the rafters. They're dark, dusty, full of tiny crevices, perfect for creepy crawlies to hide during the day. Linen sacks hang from hooks, storing clothes safely above the reach of mice, but not necessarily safe from lice. You run a hand along the wooden bench, noticing faint gnaw marks. Rodents, not insects, but equally unwelcome nighttime roommates. Joke number 2 comes as naturally as breathing. If medieval homes were hotels, the bugs would have definitely left better reviews than the humans. You take a moment to appreciate something else. Despite these conditions, people found ways to stay clean enough to function. Bathing wasn't non-existent. Peasants washed hands, faces, and feet regularly. Seasonal baths happened, especially in rivers or tubs. Clothing was washed when possible. But nothing they did equaled the modern obsession with sterilized surfaces and pest-free bedrooms. They lived with nature, not against it. A cold breeze pushes through the wall cracks, making you pull your tunic tighter. You scratch one last time, feeling the faint relief fade quickly. Someone across the room stands and shakes out a blanket. Straw dust floats through the air like powdered light. Another person lifts a shirt and inspects it, searching for lice as calmly as you might check for lint. Then a quirky memory surfaces. In some regions, people believed lice appeared more frequently on sinful or unlucky individuals, while others claimed they symbolized good fortune. Yes, good fortune. Historians still argue which version was more common, but the mental gymnastics required to turn lice into a lucky charm is honestly impressive. Joke number 3 sneaks in. Imagine showing up to a medieval job interview and saying, "Don't worry, I brought my lucky lice." You shake your head with a sleepy smile. The absurdity makes you feel more awake. The room brightens as dawn approaches. People gather near the hearth, rubbing their arms, adjusting their clothing, scratching without shame. The night has left its usual marks, bites, itches, and the quiet acceptance that comes from knowing this is simply how life works. You take a slow breath. You've survived your first truly medieval night with its full cast of tiny cohabitants. And now, you understand why medieval beds weren't just furniture, they were ecosystems. It's time to rise, stretch, and begin the morning, before anything else tries to bite you again. You wrap your wool blanket around your shoulders, but it barely holds back the cold. The air has shifted, sharper, heavier, full of that unmistakable bite that seeps through walls built from sticks and mud. This is winter in the medieval world, and now you finally understand why peasants treated nighttime the way modern people treat impending snowstorms, with equal parts dread and resignation. The cold isn't outside the house, it's in the house, swirling around your ankles, creeping up your spine and sliding into your bones like a silent guest who refuses to leave. You step toward the hearth, hoping for warmth, but what greets you is a meagre glow. The embers survive the night, but barely. You crouch down and blow gently, watching the ashes shiver. A faint orange pulse appears, but it's weak, tired, the last heartbeat of yesterday's heat. Keeping a fire alive through winter nights was an art form, one medieval peasants practiced with religious devotion. Because if that fire died completely, you weren't just cold, you were in danger. A mainstream historical fact grounds you. Medieval winter nights could be brutally long, especially in Northern Europe. In December, darkness could stretch for up to 16 hours. With no insulation, no central heating, and no real ability to seal windows or walls, indoor temperatures often dropped close to freezing. Households relied on fire, layered bedding, and, unavoidably, each other's body heat to make it through the night. You rub your arms again, shivering as a draft slips through a gap in the wall. The cottage sighs in the wind, timbers creaking under the pressure. You hear the muffled bleat of a goat outside, followed by the crunch of frost. Even the animals feel the winter weight. You glance back at the bed where everyone still huddles, arms tucked, legs curled, blankets woven around bodies like cocoons. No one wants to leave that precious pocket of warmth. You know exactly why. Stepping out of bed in winter feels like stepping into a different climate zone. Joke number 1 slips in as you exhale. Congratulations, you've unlocked the medieval winter morning challenge. Survive the first 5 minutes. You poke the embers again and add a small log. It takes time for warmth to gather. Winter taught medieval people patience, not the gentle kind, but the kind born from necessity. There's no rushing heat, no cranking up a thermostat. You wait, you breathe, you hope the fire catches. As you sit there, you notice how the room feels more cramped in winter. The cold presses everyone inward. There's no such thing as extra space. The animals sleep closer to the house. Tools crowd into corners to avoid freezing. Even the smell changes. Smoke, wool, sweat, damp wood, and the crisp metallic scent of frost. A quirky tidbit nudges your memory. Some peasants stuffed moss, straw, or old rags into gaps in the walls to keep out the wind, transforming their homes into something between a nest and a makeshift insulation system. It wasn't perfect, but it helped. People also hung tapestries, blankets, or spare clothing along walls, not to look decorative, but to stop drafts from stabbing them in the back at 3 a.m. Historians still argue whether these practices were consistent across regions, or mostly used in colder climates, but plenty of evidence shows that winter inspired endless creativity. You shift closer to the fire and warm your hands, though the heat barely registers. The room is still dim. Frost patterns cling to the oiled cloth window. You rise and walk toward it, touching the stiff surface with your fingertips. It's cold enough to sting. And then you remember something else. Long winter nights changed the rhythm of sleep. Segmented sleep wasn't just convenient, it was inevitable. With so many hours of darkness, peasants often slipped into first sleep earlier and slept longer overall. Winter demanded rest, recovery, and patience, but winter also demanded caution. Fires needed tending, children needed watching, animals needed shelter. A spark could set the entire house ablaze. A forgotten ember could leave a family shivering. Winter sleep wasn't peaceful, it was vigilant. Your teeth chatter, and you wrap the blanket tighter. Someone behind you stirs. A man rises, pulling on his wool tunic while muttering curses at the cold with medieval eloquence. A woman rubs her upper arms, eyes half-lidded, wrapped like a weary burrito. A child curls deeper into the blankets, refusing to acknowledge morning exists. You grin. Joke number 2 arrives on cue. Medieval winter motto: if I don't move, maybe the cold won't find me. As more people rise, the room fills with movement. Slow, stiff, reluctant. Winter mornings bring aches. Sleeping on straw that compresses into lumpy ridges only makes it worse. You stretch your back, feeling each vertebra pop like a string of firecrackers. Outside, pale light spills slowly across the frosted yard. Smoke drifts lazily from neighbouring cottages. A rooster crows, sounding like it regrets everything. The village wakes not with energy, but with determination. A mainstream fact returns. Peasants consumed more calories in winter, often relying on heavy breads, stored grains, salted meat, and potages rich with whatever vegetables survive storage. They needed the fuel because winter drains energy at a shocking rate. You watch as someone retrieves the morning pottage from a clay pot kept near the fire overnight. It's thick, sticking to the sides, smelling faintly of onions, barley, and whatever herbs were left over from yesterday. Medieval winter breakfasts weren't glamorous, but they were warming. You take a bowl, blowing gently on the steam. The warmth spreads through your hands first, then your chest. For a moment, you don't feel the frost biting your ankles. You feel human again. But even as your body warms, the cold still prowls through the room, settling in corners, crawling, across the floor. Winter isn't done with you, not by a long shot. Joke number 3 lands softly. You now understand why medieval people didn't say, "Good morning." They said something closer to, "We survived the night." Barely. You sip the pottage slowly, savouring its earthy, grounding taste. Outside, the sun finally rises. The frost glitters, the animals stir. The village comes alive with soft chatter and clinking tools. You've lived through a medieval winter night, and now, wrapped in your blanket, warm bowl in hand, you feel the quiet triumph peasants felt every morning they woke before the cold claimed them. It's not comfort, it's resilience, and winter still has months to go. You step outside the cottage for just a moment, expecting relief after the long frigid night, but instead, a heavy wave of warmth hits you like a wool blanket fresh from the fire. Except this isn't comforting warmth. This is sticky, uncooperative medieval summer heat, the kind that makes the air feel thick enough to chew. You blink, wipe your forehead, and instantly regret leaving the cool shadow of the doorway. Summer nights may be shorter, but they're just as challenging, maybe even worse. You retreat inside again, but the cottage isn't much better. The walls trap heat like an oven. The thatched roof radiates the day's warmth downward. The smell of warm wool, stale straw, and everyone's body heat hangs like an invisible curtain. You inhale cautiously. It's ripe. Energy efficient. Sure, pleasant. Not even a little. A mainstream historical fact grounds you. Medieval houses had poor ventilation, especially at night, because windows were small and often covered with oiled cloth or wooden shutters. Opening them invited insects, thieves, or wandering animals. So peasants endured the heat with the stoicism of people who didn't have a choice. Summer sleep wasn't about coziness. It was about endurance. You find your place beside the bed again, noticing how restless everyone looks. Blankets are pushed aside. Clothes cling to damp skin. Hair sticks to foreheads. A man wipes sweat from his neck with the edge of his tunic. A woman fans herself half-heartedly with a piece of folded cloth. A child sprawls like a starfish, clearly living their best and sweatiest life. You lie down and feel the straw beneath you, warm, scratchy, and somehow humid, which shouldn't be scientifically possible, yet here you are, living it. And then it happens, the familiar buzz of a mosquito near your ear. Joke number 1 slips in effortlessly. Welcome to medieval summer, where the mosquitoes have better aim than your Wi-Fi. You swat at the air, hoping you missed the mosquito on purpose. But the buzzing returns almost immediately. You look toward the window. Its cloth covering glows faintly with moonlight, but it's pulled tight to keep the night creatures out. It also keeps fresh air out, which means you're basically sleeping inside a giant, slightly damp bread loaf. The heat makes sleep shallow. People roll over constantly, trying to find a cool patch of linen. Spoiler, there are none. You can practically map every warm spot on the bed, like a medieval treasure chart titled "Where Comfort Goes to Die." A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some medieval households slept on the floor during hot nights, spreading thin mats near the door to catch whatever breeze dared to wander inside. Floors, made of packed earth, stayed cooler than beds elevated above the ground. Not luxurious, but practical. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread habit or limited to certain regions, but either way, it shows how flexible peasants had to be with their sleep environment. You shift again, then again. The summer heat feels alive, like it's deliberately poking you every few seconds. Nearby, someone else flips over aggressively, causing the entire straw mattress to shudder. A baby fusses, clearly unhappy that the world has turned into a medieval sauna. Someone whispers a tired prayer asking for cooler air, or possibly forgiveness for wanting to sleep in the nearest pond. You fan your shirt slightly to let air in. It doesn't help. The cottage feels like it's trapping every breath. And because it's summer, the smell builds too. Sweat, smoke, livestock, damp wool, and that faint hint of dried herbs used to mask odours. Medieval noses were more tolerant than yours. You're fighting for your life. Another mainstream fact steadies your thoughts. Summer nights often meant more work, not less. Peasants took advantage of longer daylight hours, harvested crops late into the evening, and rose earlier to avoid the midday heat. So by the time they went to sleep, their bodies were exhausted, but not magically comfortable. You listen to the symphony of summer noises around you. Crickets outside, the soft, rhythmic snorts of pigs in their pen, the distant hoot of a night bird. Inside, soft murmurs, occasional complaints, a long sigh from someone who has clearly accepted their sweaty fate. Then joke number 2 slips in. Modern summer problem. It's too hot for the blankets. Medieval summer problem. It's too hot for existence. You decide to try shifting closer to the window. Maybe the air is cooler there. You crawl quietly across the mattress, trying not to elbow the person next to you, but failing instantly because medieval beds are the size of a modern postage stamp. "Sorry, Agnes," she grumbles, half asleep. You reach the window and hold your hand near the cloth. A tiny breath of air brushes your palm. A miracle. You lean toward it, letting the breeze cool your forehead for a moment. It's faint, but it feels heavenly. You sit there, breathing slowly, when another quirky detail drifts into your thoughts. Some medieval people slept naked in summer, not for comfort or sensuality, but because clothing trapped heat. Linen shifts or undergarments were removed entirely. Privacy? Not a thing. Modesty? Also not. A thing when the temperature tries to melt your soul. Historians still argue how common this was, but it definitely happened in households that prioritized survival over propriety. You look back at the room. Even in the dim light, you can see everyone's discomfort. Sleep doesn't come easily in this heat. It's a restless, tossing ache. You lie down again, letting your mind drift. The air is thick, but your body gradually adapts. Every inhale feels a little lighter. Every exhale releases a little more tension. The sounds soften. The heat stops feeling hostile and becomes something you float inside, like a warm pond. Your eyelids grow heavy. Your breathing slows, and despite every discomfort, the sweat, the insects, the stale air, you begin to understand how medieval peasants coped, not by fighting the heat, but by surrendering to it. Joke number 3 glides in as you drift. At least it's too hot for lice to be energetic right now. Small wins. Your body finally relaxes. The night thickens. The room settles into a quiet, sticky rhythm. You close your eyes, slipping into a shallow but steady sleep, the kind that carries medieval peasants through the hottest nights of the year until morning brings relief or, honestly, more heat. Either way, you've survived the medieval summer sleep experience. You drift in and out of sleep, the summer heat finally loosening its grip just enough for you to breathe. The cottage is quiet now, soft, heavy, warm. But beyond its walls, something breaks the silence. A single, low, resonant tone rolls across the village like a gentle tremor in the night. You blink awake, confused at first, then slowly remembering that this is no fantasy sound effect. It's the church bell. You sit up slightly, rubbing your eyes. The bell tolls again, steady, deliberate, unmistakably medieval. Not loud enough to startle, but impossible to ignore. And suddenly the whole night feels different, as if someone gently tapped the unpause button on the world. You inhale and feel the moment settle over you like dew. A mainstream historical fact centres you. Church bells regulated nearly every aspect of medieval life. They marked prayer hours, work hours, danger, celebrations, funerals, curfews, and even sleep. While there wasn't a bell rung specifically labelled "Go to bed, peasants," there were bells that indirectly shaped sleep patterns, especially the ones that chimed in the late evening and after midnight. The bell you're hearing now, likely a call to prayer for the night office or a signal marking the hour between first and second sleep. You look around. A few people stir. One woman rolls over, mumbling something about needing 5 more minutes. A man nearby shifts on the straw mattress, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand before settling again. Children fidget. The village rooster makes a tiny confused noise, clearly wondering if it slept through its own alarm. Joke number 1 drifts in smoothly. Congratulations! You've just experienced the medieval version of a push notification, sponsored by the church. You stand carefully, stretching your back. The cottage is thick with the mixed scents of smoke, wool, and last night's pottage. You step toward the door and lift the wooden latch with slow, quiet fingers. The cool air outside greets you with a gentle kiss, not cold enough to sting, but refreshing after the heavy heat. The sky's a deep, velvety blue, sprinkled with stars and the faintest hint of dawn silver. And there, rising above the rooftops, the church tower. It stands tall, square, solemn. The bell swings rhythmically inside its wooden frame, casting its voice across fields, houses, and winding dirt paths. The sound carries effortlessly through the still night, slipping beneath doorways and through shutters, nudging the sleeping world toward wakefulness. A quirky tidbit nudges your mind at just the right moment. In some villages, the matins bell rung around midnight was believed to repel evil spirits, marking a shift in the spiritual status of the night. People said that demons fled, angels entered, or restless souls settled when the bell chimed. Historians still argue whether this was serious belief or simply comforting folklore, but the bell's power was undeniable. It structured both physical and spiritual rhythm. You close your eyes and listen. There's a gentle melancholy to the sound, a hum that feels ancient and grounding. It gives the village a heartbeat, slow, steady, comforting. Inside the cottage, someone lights a small lamp, its flame flickering against the clay walls. Maybe they're preparing for early prayers. Maybe they're checking on a restless child. Maybe they just need to make sure the fire survived the night. The bell's low tone seems to guide them, telling them, yes, now is the time to rise, or at least pretend to. A man nearby yawns loudly and runs fingers through his hair, dislodging yesterday's sweat and possibly half a colony of sleepy lice. Someone else mumbles a soft prayer under their breath, the words too quiet to catch but familiar in cadence. Even if you don't share the prayer, the moment wraps itself around you in a gentle, reverent hush. You step back from the door and let the latch fall quietly. The bell fades, replaced by the soft hum of night creatures. The cottage feels different now, more awake, more aware, more connected to the rhythms beyond its walls. Joke number 2 slips in as you return to the bed. Imagine living in a world where your alarm clock belongs to the entire neighbourhood. No snooze button, no mercy. You settle again on the straw, your body slowly warming the spot you left. Someone beside you shifts, adjusting their blanket. A child curls tighter, tucking knees under chin. The summer heat still lingers, but the breeze you brought in through the door has softened its weight. As you lie there, you realise something important. The bell wasn't just a sound. It was a social anchor. Everyone heard the same tone. Everyone moved to the same rhythm. Whether rich or poor, young or old, devout or sceptical, every soul in the village lived inside the time carved out by that bell. It wasn't precise. It didn't mark minutes or seconds. But it didn't need to. Medieval life flowed with natural tempo shaped by sun, season, and sound. The bell simply tethered that flow, giving it direction. You close your eyes again. The world grows still. The hum of insects replaces the bell. The faint breeze nudges the oiled cloth window. Someone nearby breathes deeply, slipping back into sleep. Joke number 3 settles in softly. At least the church doesn't blast ads before the bell rings. This morning's prayers are brought to you by... Nope, just lovely uninterrupted ringing. You inhale deeply, letting the cool air soothe your chest. You exhale slowly, and your body sinks into the mattress. The bell's echo lingers in your mind like a fading memory. This is medieval timekeeping, not measured by digits but by echoes in the night. And as your eyes close once more, you let yourself drift into the comforting thought that even in darkness the bell connects you to every other sleeper in the village. You're not alone. You're part of the rhythm now. You lie there for a moment longer, letting the last ghost of the church bell fade from your ears. The room is quiet again, but not the same quiet as before. This one has an alertness to it, a soft awareness humming through the cottage. It's the kind of silence that says, everyone's awake enough to pretend they're still asleep. You breathe slowly, feeling the warm air settle. But then you notice movement. A figure rises from the far corner of the room. Someone else sits up near the hearth. A third person quietly reaches for a wooden bowl or a bundle of cloth. You blink, watching with curiosity, and slowly realize you've entered one of the most fascinating parts of medieval nightly life: night work. This midnight to pre-dawn period, after the first sleep before the second, wasn't just for prayer or quiet reflection. It was a pocket of productivity hidden inside the dark. And peasants, being the masters of squeezing usefulness out of every hour, took full advantage of it. You sit up carefully, adjusting your tunic as you ease your feet onto the cool floor. That cold shocks you awake in the most impolite way possible. Joke number one comes instantly. Congratulations, you've discovered the medieval version of a coffee-free wake-up call, hypothermia. You stand, observing the room. A woman kneels near a cloth-wrapped bundle, slowly mending a tear in her child's tunic. Her fingers move with steady, practiced motions, even in dim lighting. The only light she uses is a single ember lamp, its glow trembling softly like a shy firefly. A man sits near the hearth, sharpening a small sickle for the coming day. The rhythmic scrape of metal on stone slices through the quiet like a whispered metronome. He doesn't seem bothered by the hour. In fact, he looks oddly peaceful, as though this is the best time to get things done. A mainstream historical fact helps explain the scene. The watch between first and second sleep was considered prime time for quiet work. People mended clothes, repaired tools, tied fishing nets, braided ropes, ground grain, and prepared ingredients. With everyone else drowsy or still half asleep, the cottage was calm, perfect for tasks requiring focus. Productivity wasn't scheduled, it just lived wherever time allowed. You move closer to the hearth, warming your hands. The fire's been coaxed back to a soft, steady glow. Enough light to work by, but not enough to wake the whole household. The atmosphere hums with intention. Not rushed, not frantic, just useful. Someone else rises, a teenager stretching their arms before quietly stepping outside. You follow to the door and crack it open just enough to see. Moonlight spills across the yard, illuminating the shapes of outbuildings and the faint line of the forest beyond. The teenager walks toward a small shed, carrying a basket of tools. They're checking traps, simple wooden ones for rabbits or small pests. Night was an ideal time to do this. Animals were more active, and the traps less disturbed by daytime noise. A quirky tidbit floats to mind. Some medieval households brewed ale during these midnight hours, especially the women. Brewing required careful timing, heating, cooling, watching, stirring, and doing it while the village slept made the work easier and reduced the chance of contamination from daytime dust or wandering animals. Historians still argue whether midnight brewing was common practice or region-specific, but the pattern appears in several records. You watch your breath fog in the cool night air. The moonlit world feels secretive, hushed, not dangerous, just unusually alive. Insects buzz softly near the well. A horse shifts in the barn. An owl glides over the field in a perfect silent swoop. You step back inside, letting the door whisper shut. Someone across the room is quietly counting something. Beans, perhaps, or seeds, preparing for planting or rationing. Another person near the table grinds herbs with a small mortar and pestle, preparing medicines or spices for the following day. Even in near darkness, they work without hesitation. And then you notice one more figure, a young woman sitting by the bed, whispering to her husband. Their voices are low, intimate. the kind of conversation couples save for moments when the world stops tugging at them. Dreams, fears, plans. This was the only time the medieval day gave them privacy. Joke number 2 lands gently. Midnight was basically the medieval version of, we need to talk, but the kids can't hear. You sit back on the straw mattress, observing all of it. It feels like you've stepped into a hidden chapter of medieval life, one historians know from scattered records but rarely describe in vivid detail. This watch period wasn't idle. It was full of purpose, quiet purpose, focused purpose, even secret purpose. Because yes, some medieval people did use this time for forbidden tasks. A man might sneak out to hunt illegally on lordly land. A woman might fetch water in secret to avoid gossip. A teenager might meet someone in the shadows at the edge of the village. These weren't scandalous acts, just things better done when no one else had eyes on you. Another quirky historical whisper. Midnight was considered a spiritually liminal time, perfect for certain rituals, blessings, or charms. People collected herbs, whispered protective prayers, braided talismans, or checked on livestock believed to be vulnerable to spirits. Historians still argue whether these practices were widespread truth or localized superstition, but it's clear the watch belonged to both the natural and the mystical. You stretch your legs and feel your eyelids start to droop again. The fire crackles softly, sending warm amber patterns across the walls. The workers in the room begin finishing their tasks. The sharpening slows, the sewing pauses, the last herbs are ground. The teenager returns, placing the empty trap basket by the door. Joke number 3. Drifts in as you yawn. Congratulations. You've just lived through medieval multitasking. Productivity levels, terrifying. One by one, people slip back into the bed or onto benches, folding their bodies into familiar shapes. The cottage quiets again. The fire calms. The air grows heavier with sleep. The night work is done. The secret hour closes. Second sleep calls once more. You lie down, letting the warm hum of the room wrap around you. The world exhales, and you follow it back down. You sink back into the straw for just a moment, letting your body stretch like a sleepy cat. But before your mind can slide comfortably towards second sleep again, you hear something. A faint, irregular scrape outside the cottage wall. Not loud, not alarming, just wrong enough to snap your attention into focus. You hold your breath. The noise comes again, a soft crunch, a shuffle, then silence. Your entire body goes still. Inside the cottage, no one else reacts at first. They're settling back in, rolling over, pulling blankets up to their chins. But the night beyond these thin walls is very real, very present, and very capable of delivering surprises. You remind yourself that medieval people didn't have the luxury of assuming nighttime noises were harmless. There were no cameras, no porch lights, no security alarms, only human instinct, watchfulness, and a good sturdy stick. A mainstream historical fact sets the stage. Rural medieval villages had little formal nighttime security. No patrols, no police, no safe suburban quiet. Protection came from locked doors, when homes even had locks, and from alert household members who listened for danger. Theft was common. Food stores, tools, or livestock could be stolen under the cover of darkness, and every family was its own security system. Someone else hears the noise now. A man sitting closest to the door stiffens. He exchanges a look with the woman beside him, a silent, practiced communication that says, "We're checking." He stands, moving quietly, hand gripping a wooden staff that doubles as both walking stick and home defense weapon. Medieval efficiency at its finest. Joke number 1 sneaks in as he pads toward the door. Medieval self-defense, no martial arts, just hit it with a stick. You watch him lift the latch slowly, carefully, like someone defusing an explosive made entirely of darkness and guesswork. The door opens just a crack. Cold air sweeps in. The man peers outside, shoulders stiff, eyes narrowed, breath held. A moment passes, then another. Finally he relaxes. Just a stray dog nosing around the compost heap. Nothing sinister. No thieves, no wolves, no wandering spirits. Just a hungry animal doing its nightly rounds. He closes the door softly and returns to his bed, but the tension in the room lingers a bit longer. Everyone pretends to settle, but you can feel their awareness sharpen. Night safety isn't something medieval peasants take lightly. Danger may come as rarely as once a season, but that one moment can destroy everything. You lie back against the pillow, feeling the truth of it settle around you. Medieval nights were vulnerable, houses were flimsy, doors rarely locked, windows were basically suggestions. Anyone or anything that wanted in had very few obstacles. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. Some households placed iron objects near doors or on windowsills at night. Tools, knives, horseshoes, believing iron repelled not just thieves, but also harmful spirits or wandering witches. Historians still argue whether peasants truly believed in iron's protective power, or simply trusted it because, well, iron is heavy and scary looking. You shift your blanket and listen to the outside world. The wind brushes the thatch. The dog sniffs around again. Somewhere in the village, a cow complains loudly, because cows have no concept of appropriate timing. A rooster attempts a half-asleep crow, immediately regrets it, and stops. Inside, someone mumbles a sleepy prayer, just a short one, something about protection through the night. Another child curls closer to a sibling. The cottage feels warm again, but a little more alert. You understand why medieval families took turns doing informal night watches, especially in vulnerable seasons. Another mainstream fact anchors the atmosphere. Bandits, hungry travellers, or desperate neighbours sometimes stole food or livestock under cover of darkness. Even the poorest households had something worth taking. A chicken, a tool, a handful of grain. Families slept lightly because survival depended on vigilance. You watch the man lay his staff beside him again, within easy reach. Another person places a wooden ladle near their pillow, because even ladles can be weapons in a pinch. It's both funny and sobering. Nighttime wasn't guaranteed safety. It was a period of caution wrapped inside the dark. Joke number 2 arrives when you imagine writing a medieval threat assessment report. Risk level, moderate. Threats include wolves, thieves, critters, and ghosts. Recommended action, hit everything with stick. You breathe slowly and let the cottage sounds wash over you. Someone coughs softly. A baby shifts. A woman mutters in her sleep. The fire sighs. The rhythm of life resumes, but with an edge of alertness that wasn't there before. And then something unexpected happens. One of the older men in the room sits up, walks to the small window and peers out with a practiced eye. He's not checking for danger. He's checking the weather. Medieval agriculture demanded constant awareness, even at night. A change in wind could mean a coming storm. A shift in cloud cover could signal rain by morning. Farmers lived by the sky, and they never stopped reading it. You listen to the man grumble something about a wet dawn, and return to bed with the confidence of someone who's correctly predicted 40 years of weather using nothing but vibes. Joke number 3 slips in, gently. Medieval meteorology. Look outside, guess, hope for the best. The cottage settles again. The air grows warmer. The moment of tension dissolves into a comfortable hum. Safety, for now, has returned. You lie back down, closing your eyes as the gentle weight of the blanket settles over your chest. The night outside continues, but the fear passes. The danger fades. And the cottage breathes deeply again, returning to that fragile, familiar peace. You pull your blanket up to your chin, relieved. You're still safe. And now, nothing stands between you and second sleep. You ease back into the warmth of the covers, letting the cottage breathe around you like a living creature. The danger has passed, the night grows softer, and the hush settling across the room feels like an invitation to drift again. But before second sleep fully pulls you under, something else catches your attention. A faint, grassy scent wafting from a bundle near the hearth. At first you think it's just someone's clothing or maybe leftover hay. But no, it's something intentional, something fragrant, something herbal. You sit up slightly, rubbing your arms, and realize you've stumbled into one of the most surprisingly delightful parts of medieval sleep culture. Herbal remedies, not fancy oils, not delicate scented candles, not spa-grade potions, just simple plants plucked from fields, hedgerows, and cottage gardens, carefully dried and used to coax the mind toward rest, or to fight off the nighttime nasties. A mainstream historical fact roots you in the moment. Medieval families relied heavily on herbs for sleep, protection, and health, not because they preferred natural remedies, but because they didn't have other options. Apothecaries were expensive. Physicians were for the wealthy. For peasants, the world's pharmacy grew right outside the door, You shuffle closer to the hearth and inspect the bundle. It's tied with a thin strand of wool stuffed with dried lavender, a sprig of valerian, and what looks like crushed mint. Someone must have hung it earlier that evening. Herbal pouches like this were common charms, hung for luck, for health, or simply for the soothing scent that makes a smoky cottage feel a little less rough around the edges. A woman sitting nearby notices you looking and smiles sleepily before adjusting her own charm pouch hanging from the rafters. You nod back, feeling oddly reassured by the soft herbal perfume lingering in the warm air. You take a slow breath, savouring the scent. And that's when joke number 1 arrives. Congrats! You've just discovered the medieval version of essential oils, minus the influencer marketing. As you sit there, you spot several other signs of medieval herbal sleep aids. A small bowl containing dried hops. Yes, the same plant used in beer rests near the hearth. Hops were known to have mild sedative effects, and people sometimes stuffed them into pillows to calm restless nights. Imagine sleeping on a pillow that faintly smells like a brewery. Comforting? Questionable? Effective? Maybe. A quirky tidbit pops into your mind. Some medieval people placed fennel seeds under their pillows to keep nightmares away, believing the seeds confused or repelled evil spirits. Others used dill, chamomile, or rosemary. Rosemary in particular was believed to protect the soul during sleep. Historians still argue whether this belief had pagan roots or Christian symbolism, but the practice itself was widespread enough that even wealthy households used rosemary sprigs as protective charms. You look up toward the rafters again and notice rope charms, simple twine tied into knots. These weren't herbs, but served a similar purpose. People believed knot spells trapped fears, illnesses, or bad dreams inside the loops until morning. You briefly consider tying a knot to trap the lingering dread from last night's strange noises. Can't hurt, right? Someone nearby begins pouring a warm drink into a wooden cup. You follow the scent, heated ale with a sprinkle of herbs, likely a mixture meant to soothe nerves or ease digestion. Warm ale probably isn't your first idea of a bedtime beverage, but here it's a trusted remedy. You watch the man take a slow sip, sigh contentedly, and crawl back under the blankets. Joke number 2 taps your mind gently. Move over chamomile tea. Medieval NyQuil was hot herb beer. You turn your attention to another corner of the room where a woman is gently rubbing a balm onto her wrists and temples. The balm is thick and sticky, made from rendered animal fat mixed with crushed herbs, probably lavender, sage, or balm mint. It glistens faintly in the firelight. Medieval people used salves like this to calm the mind, soothe headaches, or ward off bad air, which they believed caused illness during sleep. You smell the blend as she passes near you, and it's surprisingly pleasant. Earthy, floral, soothing. You can practically feel your eyelids grow heavier. A mainstream fact swims into your thoughts. Much of medieval herbal knowledge was passed down orally, especially among women. Mothers, grandmothers, midwives, and healers kept the practical wisdom alive, which herbs relaxed, which soothed, which helped sleep, which frightened away spirits, which eased the breath on cold nights. These women were the guardians of nightly comfort long before textbooks or formal medicine existed. The man sharpening tools earlier, now fully tucked in again, coughs once and rolls over. Behind him, you spot a branch of dried birch leaning against the wall. Birch was often used to beat bedding, literally to shake out pests and release fresh scent. If you weren't itchy already, you probably will be after thinking about that ritual. But it was effective, more or less. Your gaze wanders to a small clay pot near the hearth. Its lid is cracked open slightly, revealing an aromatic paste. A sleeping tonic, a charm, or maybe just some leftover cooking grease. Hard to tell at this hour. Another quirky detail dawns on you. Medieval people sometimes placed bread under pillows to absorb nightmares. Yes, bread. Historians still argue whether this practice had symbolic meaning, or if it simply reflected the idea that bread represented life and protection. Either way, you make a mental note not to sleep on your snacks. Joke number 3 glides in softly. If you ever feel weird about modern sleep gadgets, remember some medieval peasants stuffed bread under their heads and called it protection. The room grows quieter. The herbal scents settle into the warm air, layered between smoke and sweat and summer heaviness. It shouldn't be calming, but it is. You lie down again, your body sinking into the straw with a softness you didn't expect. The herbs work their slow magic, not through any mystical power, but through familiarity, routine, and the quiet comfort of tradition. The fire dims, the air cools just enough. The scent of lavender drifts toward you like a gentle hand guiding you back to sleep. You exhale slowly. Your limbs loosen. The room softens, and once again, medieval night invites you into its dream-filled embrace, this time with a soothing herbal escort. You settle again into the straw mattress, the faint sense of lavender and mint still hovering in the warm air, when something small shifts beside you. A tiny sigh, the soft rustle of small limbs, a child, sleep-tousled hair, flushed cheeks, blanket half kicked away, is curled near your side. And suddenly, you're reminded of something central to medieval nights. Children shape the rhythm of sleep more than anything else. You glance around the cottage. Every family member, old, young, restless, exhausted, is woven into this nightly tapestry. But children? Children are the thread that tugs and loops unpredictably. A toddler murmurs in their sleep. A baby whimpers faintly. An older child scratches their leg, wrestling a dream or an itch. Medieval nights weren't silent, still, or orderly. They were full of the living sounds of small, fragile humans who depended on adults for survival. A mainstream historical fact grounds this moment. Child mortality in the medieval world was painfully high, which made nighttime vigilance not just an instinct, but a necessity. Parents slept lightly. They checked breathing. They soothed fevers. They watched for tremors, chills, or the faint signs of illnesses they didn't fully understand. Nighttime was both comfort and crisis. You watch as a mother across the room stirs at the tiniest squeak from her infant. Her eyes snap open, not in fear, but in training. She scoops the child into her arms, humming softly, rocking them with gentle, rhythmic motions that were undoubtedly passed down through generations. The baby calms quickly, sinking into her chest. The sound is small, but it fills the entire cottage with a quiet gravity. Then something else happens. The mother adjusts a charm pouch tied to the baby's swaddling cloth. It's a small bag of rosemary and blessed salt, meant to guard the infant against night spirits, illness, or evil winds. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your mind. Many medieval parents believed children were especially vulnerable to supernatural harm at night. They whispered protective prayers. They hung amulets. They kept iron tools near cradles. They even traced small crosses near the child's forehead or chest before sleep. Historians still argue whether these customs came from Christian practice or far older pagan beliefs, but they were nearly universal. You shift slightly, feeling the child beside you wiggle, then settle. They reach for your arm instinctively, tiny fingers curling over your sleeve. The motion is so natural, so human, that it tugs at something deep in your chest. Medieval children didn't have separate bedrooms. They didn't sleep alone. They didn't slip into darkness in isolation. They were surrounded by warmth, bodies, breath, tiny anchors reminding adults why every night mattered. Nearby, another child whispers into the darkness, half asleep, eyes closed. They mutter about a cow, or a field, or something that only makes sense in the labyrinth logic of dreams. Their sibling grumbles and shoves them gently. You smile. Joke number one drifts in softly. Medieval children didn't need baby monitors, just very annoyed siblings. You watch the scene unfold. Families tucking children closer on cold nights, pulling blankets over their tiny bodies, humming lullabies that sound older than the cottage itself. Everyone sleeps in clusters, layers of bodies arranged like puzzle pieces. Children curl into the crooks of elbows, the spaces between ribs and shoulders, the warm dips of blankets. It's chaotic but oddly beautiful. Then you notice something else. A woman near the foot of the bed places a small wooden cross beside her child. She whispers something, too faint to hear but unmistakably protective. Her posture is tired but tender. You remember a second quirky tidbit. Some parents believed the soul wandered during sleep, especially in children whose spirits were thought to be lighter and more easily distracted. They worried that wandering souls could attract malevolent forces or fail to return properly, causing nightmares or illness. Blending faith, folklore, and maternal instinct, they protected children fiercely during the hours of darkness. Historians still debate how literally people believed in wandering souls, but the rituals reflect something universally human: fear for one's children and a desire to shield them from unseen dangers. You take a deep breath, letting the cottage sounds fill your ears again. Children snuffling, adults murmuring, the fire cracking softly. The symphony of nighttime humanity settles around you. It's not peaceful in the modern sense, but it's organic, whole, deeply alive. A child suddenly kicks violently in their sleep, nearly launching a blanket across the room. Someone groans, someone else chuckles. Joke number 2 surfaces effortlessly. Congratulations. The medieval family bed includes free karate demonstrations every night. You shift your position and find the small child beside you has curled even closer, their cheek warm against your shoulder. In a world full of physical hardship, cold, illness, hunger, this closeness is survival, not just for children but for adults too. A mainstream fact returns to center your thoughts. Children often slept with their parents until late childhood, not to spoil them, but to keep them alive. Warmth, monitoring, feeding, safety. Everything happened within arm's reach. And despite the crowded chaos, this arrangement created strong emotional bonds, tightly knit families, and a night environment where children grew up immersed in the rhythms of adult life. You look across the room and notice an older sibling carefully covering a younger one with their own blanket edge. The small act, nearly invisible, speaks volumes. Children learned responsibility early. They weren't just cared for, they were caregivers too. The fire crackles softly again, sending sparks into the dim air. You feel your eyelids grow heavy. The warmth of the child beside you, the soft hum of the room, the protective rituals woven throughout the night, they all pull you towards sleep once more. Joke number 3 drifts in drowsily. At this point, if one more child kicks you, you might qualify as a medieval babysitter. You inhale slowly, letting the warmth settle. You exhale softly, letting the noise fade. The cottage grows still, not silent, but safe. And with children tucked beside parents, charms overhead, and herbs lingering in the air, you slip gently back into the medieval night. You wake again, but not in your familiar peasant cottage this time. The air is different. The sounds are different. The smell, the smell is definitely different. Instead of smoke, wool, and herbal pouches, you're greeted by something far more chaotic. Sweat, spilled ale, damp wood, unwashed travellers, roasting meat, and a faint hint of the horse from the stable just outside the wall. Congratulations, you've entered the medieval inn, the noisiest sleep environment of your entire journey. You sit up slowly and blink, realizing you're not alone. Far from it. You're lying on a straw mattress that's lumpy in ways physics should forbid. There are at least 4 strangers beside you, one snoring thunderously, one mumbling, one curled like a hedgehog, and one staring at the ceiling as though reconsidering every decision that led him here. The room is dim, lit only by the dying glow of tallow candles and the moon leaking through warped shutters. A mainstream historical fact prepares you for this madness. Most medieval inns offered communal sleeping arrangements, especially the cheaper ones. Individual rooms existed, but only for the wealthy. Everyone else squeezed together in a shared chamber, sometimes even sharing beds with strangers. If the peasant cottage was a family cuddle pile, the inn is a lottery of strangers with questionable hygiene and unpredictable sleep habits. You shift, trying not to disturb the man snoring beside you. Too late. He lets out a snort that could wake the dead. Someone on the other side groans. One traveller scratches vigorously, clearly fighting off the night's flea brigade. Joke number 1 arrives instantly. Welcome to the medieval inn, where every bed comes with complimentary snoring and bonus parasites. You glance around, taking in the room in all its chaotic glory. Wooden beams overhead, dark with smoke and age. Walls covered in rough plaster, cracked like a tired smile. The floor? Let's just say you choose not to look too closely at the dark stains near the door. A draught slips through the cracks, carrying the muffled sounds of laughter and shouting from the tavern below. Because yes, unlike the quiet of home, medieval inns were built on top of noise machines known as taverns. Footsteps slam up and down the stairs. A tankard crashes somewhere below. Someone bellows a song about turnips or lost love, possibly both. You hear a donkey bray outside, followed by someone yelling at the donkey, followed by the donkey ignoring them entirely. Sleep. Here, bold of you to assume, But this wasn't unusual. Inns were hubs of life. Travellers, merchants, pilgrims, messengers, soldiers, thieves, performers, and the occasional suspicious monk all passed through nightly. The noise never truly stopped. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some inns required guests to bring their own bedding, because the innkeeper wasn't about to wash sheets for dozens of strangers. Others offered bed space rather than actual beds, a strip of floor, a shared straw pallet, or even a spot on a bench. Historians still argue whether travellers accepted these conditions or merely endured them, but either way, this was the norm. Someone beside you suddenly sits up and glares groggily toward the direction of a loud thud downstairs. "They'll be at it till cock crow," he mutters, though his tone suggests he's used to it. He pulls his cloak tighter and lies back down, resigned to his fate. You, meanwhile, inch your way to the side of the bed and place your feet carefully on the floor. The boards are cold but mercifully dry tonight. You stand, stretching your legs. Every joint pops like firewood. You try not to imagine what shape you must have slept in. Another mainstream fact floats into your thoughts. Travellers slept lightly because inns could be dangerous. Theft was common. People guarded their shoes under their pillows and tied their bags to their wrists. If something wasn't physically attached to you, you might wake to find it attached to someone else. You glance at your imagined belongings. Sure enough, tied close. Even your shoes are tucked under the mattress like contraband. You shuffle toward the small window and push the shutter open just a crack. Cool air rushes in, carrying the scent of wet earth, distant cooking fires, and a faint hint of manure. Honestly, it's refreshing compared to the interior. Outside, the moon hangs low. A wagon rattles by. A dog barks at absolutely nothing. A drunk man stumbles out of the tavern, sings 2 words of a tune, and immediately passes out on a pile of hay. Joke number 2 sneaks in softly. Medieval nightlife, like Vegas, but with more livestock. You close the shutter gently and turn back toward the sleeping strangers. One man mumbles about losing a horse. Another whispers a prayer. A woman snores softly, curled with her back to you. Despite the chaos, there's a strange sense of community here. These people don't know each other, but they share food, fire, and bed space as if fate temporarily assigned them to the same adventuring party. You notice a candle on a small table near the door. Its flame flickers wildly, casting long dancing shadows across the beams. In its circle of light you see something hanging from a nail, a charm made of river stones tied with twine. Protection? Luck? Repelling thieves? Maybe all 3. Inns often kept charms near doors and windows to ward off danger, spirits, or just bad vibes. Historians still argue whether innkeepers believed in these charms or simply used them to comfort anxious travellers. You step closer to the bed and finally lie back down, adjusting your position between strangers who shift like restless hogs. The straw scratches in new places. Someone nearby coughs loudly enough to echo. The tavern below erupts in laughter again. A lute plays badly, very badly, and yet, somehow, you feel sleep tugging at you. Maybe it's exhaustion. Maybe it's the warm press of bodies. Maybe it's the natural medieval acceptance of the chaos around you. Or maybe you've finally gone full medieval and recalibrated your expectations. Joke number 3 drifts in as your mind softens. If you can sleep here, congratulations. You can sleep literally anywhere on Earth. Your eyelids droop. The room blurs. The noise becomes a strange, comforting hum. You let out a slow breath, sinking into the mattress despite its texture and its inhabitants. Strangers beside you shift closer, sharing their warmth. The tavern below quiets just a little. The candle flickers low, and you, traveller, wanderer, honorary medieval sleeper, slip beneath the weight of night once more. You wake before dawn, not because anyone shook you, or because a church bell tolled, or because a rooster named Kevin decided to scream his soul into the void, but because your body, exhausted from yesterday's labour, simply can't pretend to rest any longer. Medieval exhaustion is a different creature. It's not the dull ache of sitting too long, or the stress buzz of too many notifications. It's a full-body, bone-deep heaviness born from hours of digging, hauling, bending, lifting, sweating, tending, carrying, scraping, grinding, and generally doing everything except resting. You stretch, slowly, carefully, feeling each muscle protest like it's filing a formal complaint. The inn is still dim, though a faint grey light bleeds through the shutters. You sit up and instantly understand the medieval morning routine. Don't think, just move before your body realizes what you're asking from it. A mainstream historical fact anchors the moment. Medieval peasants burned between 3,000 and 5,000 calories a day, depending on the season. Harvest months pushed that number even higher. Work wasn't a part of life, it was life. And sleep wasn't luxurious recovery time. It was the bare minimum needed to keep the body functional. You rub your eyes and stand. A few other travellers stir, stretching in their own awkward ways. Someone groans dramatically, the universal sound for, "My spine is a medieval disaster." Someone else reaches for their boots, stiff, heavy, and about as ergonomic as two chunks of wood tied to your ankles. You gather your things and head downstairs to the tavern area. The air is thick with stale ale, smoke, and the lingering scent of last night's roasted meat. The tables are littered with tankards, crumbs, and one unconscious man who apparently lost the battle against gravity. Joke number 1 drifts effortlessly into place. Medieval life hack. If you drink enough, every table becomes a bed. You step outside, grateful to breathe fresh air for the first time in hours. Dawn stretches across the horizon, pulling soft colours into the sky. Lavender, peach, pale gold. The village is stirring. People emerge from cottages rubbing sleep from their eyes, pulling on wool tunics, stepping into boots that haven't fit properly since the plague years. Chickens scatter underfoot. A dog trots past with a purpose only dogs understand. You start walking back toward your imaginary peasant home, feeling the morning chill nip at your cheeks. On the road, you pass a group of villagers already at work. A man hauling buckets of water from the stream, a woman sweeping the front of her cottage with a birch broom, a teenager guiding a stubborn goat toward a field. And all of them look tired. Normal tired, not "I stayed up late watching videos" tired. This is the everyday fatigue peasants carried like a second skin. But despite that heaviness, there's no hesitation. The day has begun and work waits for no one. A quirky tidbit swims into your mind. Some medieval people believed yawning too much in the morning was a sign of a wandering spirit not fully returned to the body after sleep. So if you're yawning right now, congratulations. You may just be spiritually lagging. Historians still argue whether this belief was rooted in religion or pure superstition, but it shows how people interpreted normal daily exhaustion. You continue down the path, watching villagers prepare tools. The clinking of metal echoes down the lane. A man sharpens his scythe. A woman repairs a broken rake with twine. The smell of damp earth rises around you. It's cool now, but everyone knows the heat will swell by midday, making labour even harder. You return to the cottage you've been sleeping in throughout this journey. The door creaks gently as you push it open. Inside, the family's already awake. Someone is tending the fire. Someone is throwing grain to the chickens outside. Someone else is pounding dough for the day's bread. The children rub their eyes, their hair tangled, their faces smudged with sleep. And then it hits you. Every member of the household participates in the work, even small children. There's no such thing as sleeping in. No weekend, no recovery day, just the steady rhythm of survival. You take a seat near the hearth and begin eating the leftovers of yesterday's pottage. Thick, earthy, lukewarm. It isn't glamorous, but it steadies you, giving you fuel for the hours ahead. Joke number 2 arrives naturally. At least pottage never burns your tongue. It's emotionally incapable of being hot. As you eat, a man enters the cottage covered in dew, announcing that the fields look good today, but the clouds suggest rain by evening. More weather predictions made, through sheer decades-long intuition. You nod, pretending you too can read sky vibes like a seasoned meteorologist. Then you join the others stepping outside again, tools in hand, back stiff, eyes half open. This is where sleep, or the lack of it, truly shows itself. Medieval peasants worked regardless of fatigue. Their bodies moved on memory and necessity. Some days, exhaustion blurred into a strange clarity, work numbing the mind, turning hours into muscle memory. A mainstream fact returns with weight. Productivity was tied to survival, not wealth. If peasants didn't work, they didn't eat. So even after nights of poor sleep, Noisy inns, lice infestations, or freezing cold, the field still called them. Sleep wasn't restorative luxury. It was the bare minimum needed to keep going. You follow them into the field. The morning light warms the earth, dew clings to your tunic, birds call overhead. The world feels alive and also demanding. The scythes slice through grass in clean arcs. The rakes gather hay. The tools thud into soil with steady rhythm. The work is slow, repetitive, grounding, and exhausting. Joke number 3 drifts in gently as you lift your first heavy tool. Congratulations, you've reached the medieval workout plan. Do this for 12 hours or starve. As you work, your mind drifts back to the night before, to the crowded bed, the inn's chaos, the aches and noises of communal sleep, the shared breath, the herbal scents, the scratches, the bells, the dangers. This rhythm, sleep, wake, work, repeat, isn't just a cycle. It's the heartbeat of medieval life. Every night shapes the day. Every day shapes the night. And as the sun finally rises fully, stretching light across the fields, you realize something profound. Medieval sleep wasn't restful. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't comfortable. It was practical. It was necessary. It was survival. You take another slow breath, grip your tool, and follow the villagers deeper into the morning. A new day begins, and there are miles of work before the sun sets again. You straighten your back, wiping sweat from your forehead as the morning sun climbs higher, warming the earth in a way that feels almost generous after the long, cold winter nights and the suffocating summer ones you've endured. But as you pause in the field, scythe in hand, something else begins tugging at your thoughts. Not the discomfort of straw beds or the ache in your shoulders, not the echo of church bells or the scent of lavender bundles. Instead, your mind drifts toward a wider horizon. A slow, centuries-long shift in how people slept, dreamed, and understood the night. Because medieval sleep wasn't static, it wasn't frozen in time, it evolved, changed, warped, softened, hardened again, and eventually transformed into the sleep you know today. You leave the field for a moment, walking along a narrow dirt path that curves between cottages. The morning hum is low and steady. Women draw water, men repair fences, children chase chickens with reckless optimism. But your mind is moving backward and forward at once, through centuries of change. A mainstream historical fact anchors the moment. Segmented sleep was the dominant pattern in Europe for hundreds of years. Well into the early modern period, people talked openly about first sleep and second sleep. Medical texts described it. Prayer books included nighttime devotions for the waking period. Even court records mentioned crimes occurring during the watch. It wasn't strange, it was normal. But then, slowly, things shifted. You step past a cottage where a small window, larger than most, has clear, smooth panes of glass instead of oiled cloth. Fancy, not common. Glass was expensive. But in wealthier homes, these windows changed everything. They let in more daylight, held out more wind, and softened the darkness of night. Sleep didn't have to begin so early anymore. A quirky tidbit surfaces. As cities grew and lantern-lit streets became common, people stayed awake later, enjoying nightlife, taverns, markets, or simply the novelty of seeing the world illuminated after dusk. No longer forced into bed by darkness, their internal clocks stretched and adjusted. Historians still argue whether this shift began with urbanization, improved lighting, religious changes, or even coffeehouse culture. But the trend is undeniable. You continue down the path and notice a larger building. 2 stories tall, plastered walls, tiled roof. A merchant's house. Inside, beds have curtains for privacy. Separate rooms for sleeping. Actual mattresses stuffed with feathers instead of straw. The idea of sleep becomes not just functional but comfortable. The dawn of comfort, you think. A new age creeping quietly into the night. Joke number 1 slips in as you pass the house. Ah, yes, the early prototype of your modern bedroom, version 0.4, still in beta. You walk further and hear something unfamiliar for medieval life. A clock bell chiming in a nearby town square. Regular, precise, mechanical. Clocks changed everything. Suddenly, time carved the night more sharply. People went to bed at set hours, woke at set hours. Work and prayer aligned to machines rather than the sun. Sleep became scheduled, not organic. Printed books spread information. Medical texts began questioning segmented sleep. Artificial light, candles, then oil lamps, then gas lamps, brightened the night more than ever before. People stayed awake longer, sleep compressed. You imagine a typical person in the 18th or 19th century lying awake at midnight, no longer rising for prayer or quiet reflection, but worrying they had insomnia. Joke number 2 arrives on cue. Congratulations! You've just discovered the moment humanity collectively decided to panic about perfectly normal sleep patterns. You wander beyond the village now, following a trade road toward a bustling town. You see larger inns with separated rooms, shutters that actually block wind, beds with thicker padding, hearths in private chambers. Richer families have clocks, candles, soft bedding, and routines structured around social life rather than sheer survival. But you also see the cost. Novelty replaces nature. Routine replaces rhythm. Fear replaces acceptance. People forget that waking at night was once normal. They begin to believe in 8 hours of unbroken sleep, a concept younger than many countries. Sleep becomes a performance, judged by regularity, duration, and efficiency. And suddenly you realize something profound. The way you sleep, your expectations, anxieties, habits, didn't exist for most of human history. A mainstream fact resurfaces. By the Industrial Revolution, segmented sleep had nearly vanished in the West. Work shifts, factory bells, artificial lighting, and nighttime social culture compressed sleep into one continuous block. Scholars still argue whether this was beneficial, but the shift became permanent. You walk across a stone bridge, looking down at flowing water. The night no longer belongs to stars and darkness. It belongs to street lamps, carriages, people moving through illuminated streets. Night is no longer the boundary between days. It's an extension of day itself. Another quirky tidbit drifts in. Victorian families often used nightcaps, both the drink and the actual headwear, to encourage uninterrupted sleep, believing segmented sleep was outdated, unhealthy, or uncivilized. Ironically, they were fighting their own biology. Joke number 3 surfaces softly. Imagine medieval peasants watching Victorians panic over waking at midnight. They'd be like, "Relax, you're supposed to be conscious right now, my dude." As you continue down the path, you feel centuries ripple around you. Changes in sleep patterns, changes in homes, changes in expectations, all shaping the modern experience of bedtime. Yet something stays the same across all eras. The night remains a mystery, a refuge, a place where the world softens and the mind drifts. Medieval peasants slept in patterns that made sense for their world, full of darkness, cold, danger, community, rhythm, and necessity. Their sleep was shaped by the raw edges of survival. Yours is shaped by clocks, screens, lamps, comfort, schedule, and expectation. 2 worlds, 2 rhythms, 1 human need to drift into dreams. As you walk back toward the medieval village, your village for the night, you feel the weight of these centuries settle around you like a blanket. Sleep has changed, but its purpose, never. The sun dips again, shadows lengthen, and you, timeless traveller, return to the cottage where this entire journey began. You step slowly back toward the cottage, the last traces of shifting centuries dissolving behind you like mist. The world narrows again into the familiar sounds of the medieval village. Chickens scratching at packed earth, a distant mill wheel turning with its slow groan, children laughing somewhere behind a fence. The rhythm of the place settles around you like a shawl, rough, warm, uneven, and unmistakably human. You feel the story drawing you in for one final night. The cottage door creaks as you push it open. Inside, shadows stretch across the walls, soft and elongated in the fading light. The hearth glows faintly, embers pulsing like a heartbeat. Straw mattresses lie rumpled from the day's quick rests and chores. A few tools lean against the wall, scythes, wooden rakes, a bucket patched with pitch. Everything smells like earth and wood smoke and humanity. This is where your journey ends. Inside the ordinary house where extraordinary resilience played out every night. You slip inside and sit near the hearth. The air is warm now, still scented faintly with last night's herbs. You rest your hand against the floor and feel the gentle warmth of the clay beneath your palm. The cottage breathes again, preparing for another night, and so do you. A mainstream historical fact rises softly in your thoughts. Dusk was a powerful boundary in medieval life, a threshold between labour and rest, between the seen and unseen, between the tasks of the day and the quiet collective exhale of evening. People gathered closer as the light faded. They told stories, shared fears, sang songs, prepared the fire, made space for sleep not as an indulgence but as a communal ritual. You watch as the family trickles in. A woman hangs a pot over the fire. A man removes his boots with a groan, shaking dust from their cracked leather. Children press close, hungry for food and warmth. Even the dog pads inside circles twice near the hearth and settles down with the soft grunt of an old friend. You take a bowl of evening pottage, thicker and heartier than this morning's. You eat slowly, letting the warm meal settle into your stomach. Someone hands you a crust of bread. Someone else pours you a sip of weak ale. The intimacy of this world is startling. There is no privacy, no distance, no walls between lives. Everything blends. Laughter, sleep, fear, hunger, dreams. The fire burns stronger now, its soft light bouncing across the beams overhead. A few shadows dance in the corners. Someone hums quietly while stirring the pot. A child nods off while leaning against their sibling, head lolling like a sleepy flower. A quirky tidbit shifts into view. Medieval people often believed twilight was a liminal hour, when the boundaries between the physical and spiritual worlds thinned. Some whispered prayers for protection. Others closed shutters tightly. A few tossed herbs onto the fire. Historians still argue whether this belief was rooted in religion or leftover pagan customs, but the twilight hush was real. You feel it now, a soft, velvety blue seeping through the cracks in the walls. The room grows quieter. A mother binds her daughter's hair for the night. A father places his wooden staff near the bed, in reach should danger come. Someone tidies the benches, making space for the crowded sleeping pile. The cottage feels like a living nest, warm, buzzing gently, waiting for darkness to settle fully. You lie down on the straw mattress one last time. It scratches your skin, but you adjust, letting your body find the familiar dips. People curl around you, elbows, blankets, whispered goodnights, the soft press of shared warmth. It feels human, imperfect, real. Joke number 1 surfaces softly. If you've successfully survived this many medieval nights without a chiropractor, you deserve a medal. You listen to the wind brushing the thatch. The fire gives a soft pop. Somewhere outside, the village dog barks without conviction. A baby murmurs in its half-sleep. The world shrinks gently to the size of this dim, warm room. You take a slow breath, you exhale, and then you feel something unexpected. Gratitude. For the fire, for the crowded bed, for the herbal scents still clinging to the air, for the rhythms you've witnessed, for the small, ordinary beauty of a medieval night you've now lived from beginning to end. Joke number 2 drifts in like a sleepy friend. Honestly, medieval peasants didn't need storytelling. They were too tired to stay awake anyway. The cottage dims further as people settle. Someone whispers a short prayer. Someone else pulls a blanket over your shoulder without looking. The warmth spreads. The hush deepens. This is your final medieval dawn to dusk cycle. This is the world as ordinary people lived it. Hard, strange, crowded, beautiful in ways that sneak up on you. And as the room quiets, the last thought settles in your mind. Sleep, no matter the century, is always a doorway. A surrender, a return to the cradle of human vulnerability and connection. Your eyes close. Second sleep pulls you under one last time. Joke number 3 emerges just before darkness claims your thoughts. If you snore, don't worry. Everyone here already snores louder. Your final medieval dawn waits just beyond your dreams. The cottage softens around you now, its edges blurring in this kind of quiet that feels almost like a lullaby. The fire settles into a gentle glow, each ember fading slowly, calmly, without hurry. The warmth moves across the room in slow waves, touching your hands, your cheek, your breath. The world outside grows still. No wind, no voices, just the faint murmur of night smoothing itself across the village like someone laying down a blanket. Your body loosens naturally, sinking deeper into the straw mattress, as though the past hours of labour and travel are evaporating, floating upward and away. Each inhale draws in the slow comfort of settling herbs and cooling air. Each exhale lets go of whatever tension might still cling to your shoulders. Everything feels a little softer now, a little slower, a little farther away. The sounds of the cottage, the faint breath of the family around you, the creak of a timber adjusting, the tiny scuffle of a mouse exploring its kingdom, fade into a gentle backdrop, harmless and small. They become part of the rhythm, the pulse, the quiet reassurance that you are not alone here, that you're safe, that the night is holding you. You feel the warmth of shared blankets, the softness of dim light, the way the darkness outside folds itself into something protective rather than frightening. Every shape grows rounder, every shadow gentler. The room narrows into a peaceful cocoon, and the long day behind you dissolves into softness. Let your thoughts drift now. Drift like the smoke rising from the last ember. Nothing to do, nowhere to go, just breath and warmth and the quiet hush of sleep gathering around you like a calm embrace. Let yourself rest.